Of course, Your Excellency, the hard metal array for the city walls and the energy protection dome array for the sky above the city. Everyone here participated in the construction of the Imperial City in one way or another. Even if one of us forgets something, the rest will definitely remember. One of the two replied. He was about half Robin's height and was quite plump, his huge mustache clearly visible even from behind his golden helmet. This was the leader of the Divine Blacksmiths Division, a member of Nahari Dwarves race. Listen very carefully then, because whether or not we survive will depend on you. Before the appearance of the elite forces of the humanoid white creatures, we were on our way to the top of the hill, but due to obvious circumstances, we are now stopped at about a quarter of the way. Robin spoke and then pointed toward the top of the hill. This hill that Alexander chose is characterized by a somehow narrow path to the top and a steep cliff at its end. It is indeed an excellent location for ground battles, and although we were not able to ascend completely, we now hold the neck of the hill after the White Flames dome has been widened. To be precise, no ground enemies will come from that side anymore. The two of them nodded repeatedly like chickens eating grain. Just before the battalion was surrounded on all sides even as they were on their way up. But after Robin ordered the expansion of the White Flames dome, this caused all the humanoid white creatures on both sides of the narrow road to be turned to ashes. After those at the sides died and the road up was closed, now the White Flames dome was facing ground assaults from only two sides, those who were still coming from what looked like endless body streams from down the hill, and those who were trapped up the hill. And although there were still many humanoid white creatures are still attacking crazily up the hill, tens of thousands of them, whoever dies leaves his place empty. If one died, then there is one less. Alexander and the rest of the sages engaging the enemy forces up there also noticed this and intensified the attacks on them. Before a few more minutes would pass, all the humanoid white creatures who were locked up on the top of the hill will also be exterminated, and this means... Reuben pointed toward the direction of the White Flame dome of greatest pressure, toward the bottom of the hill, and spoke. Now it is safe to say that we will only be facing the ground attack from that side. I think you understand what I'm getting at now. The leader of the Divine Blacksmiths Corps furrowed his brows furiously upon hearing this. Of course, he understood, but isn't it easier said than done? A while ago Robin had asked them about the Imperial City's arrays, and now he was telling them about the direction the ground attacks would come from. If he didn't mean that he wanted to build a wall similar to that in the Imperial City, what else could he mean? The Energy Protection Dome Array focuses heavily on dealing with the scattered flying targets, blocking their attacks and possibly striking back if it was strong enough, but it does not have the power to prevent ground hordes from passing through it. Only the wall can stop them. But how can they build a huge wall in such circumstances? Robin added, I know you have come prepared. Your space rings are full of various kinds of minerals and divine equipment. You have all the requirements with which you can build a miniature replica of the Imperial City wall. And you can also ask any squadron in the Golden Faction for help when needed. The wall is a must, and it will be over in less than a week. Is it clear? Oh, you will have to help the Rune Master Division make the foundations for the Energy Protection Dome's array as well. Yes, Your Excellency. Count on us. The dwarf slapped his hand on his chest and quickly turned back toward the Divine Blacksmiths Division. Robin nodded when he saw this and turned back to look at the other person. He was tall and thin. His fingers were also very long, and his eyes were completely black like a moonless night, but once in a while there would be a few small dots shining in them. Robin immediately realized that he was a member of the astral race of a planet Nahari. For you, I want you to make a miniature version of the Energy Protection Dome Array, not the updated one that Jabba created, but the basic array drawn on the ground with the help of a few metal foundations. Can you make it? Yes, Your Excellency. I still remember the blueprints. The astral nodded. If we start now, we can finish making an array the size of the White Flame Dome in only 2 days. Good. 2 days is fine. Robin nodded slowly. When you have finished securing this spot, I want you to move up the hill under the protection of a few sages, and expand the array little by little until it covers the whole hill from this point upwards. Can you do this for me? The star human made a full bow and spoke. You don't need to say more, Your Excellency. The Rune Masters Battalion will definitely not let you down. Robin let out a long exhale as he saw the man moving towards the Inscription Masters Battalion. Everything will depend on them now. The White Flame Dome is perfect for defense against both ground and air forces, but it can't be activated all the time. It is okay if it needs a lot of energy, it would be fine as they have a lot of energy pearls. But the white flame dome doesn't need raw energy, it depends on the fire forces and life forces to be nurtured and maintained all the time. This cannot continue. Exchanging life forces and flame forces to maintain the white flame dome might be good for the short term, but it would be a disaster if they stayed like this for a few days, even with energy pearls that could replace the energy they lost. Nothing would make up for the extreme fatigue caused by using their bodies in such intense way. They will collapse sooner or later. Robin made a choice to start an attrition war that might take weeks or even months to reach a conclusion that is in the best-case scenario, so how can he allow his forces to get exhausted in only a few days? What would happen if the white flame dome fell? Building a mini-city here before the white flame dome fell. That was the next step. And it was actually obvious to almost everyone now after his orders to Peon and 2 divisions. There were small talks here and they're questioning this reasoning. But Robin gave a deaf ear. If there is any chance of survival on this planet, it will be by creating a secure headquarters. At least temporarily. After 2 hours of giving the tasks to the Divine Blacksmiths Division and the Rune Masters Division, Robin finally opened his eyes, and with a light wave of his hand, the energy pearl disappeared from his hand as he stood firmly in his place again. Only now did he regain all of his energy and vitality that had been lost during the space travel. Deep inhale. Robin let out a long exhale to calm himself and put his mind in a clear state again. Then he started to look around him, trying to calmly analyze the situation for the first time since he set foot in this world. The scene around him had completely changed from its state 2 hours ago. The area inside the white flame dome that had just regained some stability after Robin's defensive arrangements turned into chaos again. The 10,000 divine blacksmiths and rune masters spread throughout the dome like enthusiastic ants. Some of them stacked stones to make the wall, others hammered pegs for the foundations of the energy protection dome, and some others sprayed inks all over the place, etc. 10,000 people, not one of them stood ideally without doing something. It was clear how seriously they took this mission. Other than that, the white flame dome had changed. After the siege was over and the ground attack came from one direction, most of the dome's power was concentrated in that area, and the intensity of the white flame there had become so dense that it was no longer seen behind it clearly. Even the intensity of the flame in the rest of the dome, it became very transparent. The scene surprised Robin for a moment because even if the ground attack was severe, the air battle was still raging at the top. Of course, the dome's life feature will cause it to send the largest amount of energy to the direction that needs it most. So even if the dome is attacked from above or anywhere else, it would still send enough energy to that spot to defend itself momentarily. But this scene still says a lot about the intensity of the ground attack. The survival instinct of the dome paid the ground attacks more attention than those saints and sages above. But it is not ununderstandable. Stopping some spread-out attacks from above is not the same as stopping bodies. The dome indeed doesn't need to deal with any precise heavenly law attacks from the ground hordes, but it still has to burn their bodies to ashes when they dare to touch it. The energy consumption in this case isn't the least bit inferior to facing direct attack for saints and sages. Of course, in normal times this wouldn't be an issue, as the enemy army would normally attack the dome from afar when they knew its capabilities. No sane army would send him troops to be turned to ashes like this. This isn't even using them as cannon fodder anymore. Looking at the rate at which these humanoid white creatures die and the mountains of ashes everywhere, Robin could tell that a couple of millions had died already. But it is not an unpractical move either. If not for the fact that they have the energy pearls replenishing them with all the energy they need, the dome would have fallen long ago. Thinking about it, Robin looked up to see the results of the air battle. Around 20,000 saints and sages of humanoid white creatures, against 6,000 sages of the Golden Battalion. Although the balance seemed to be tipped in favor of the enemies greatly, the divine weapons and perfect heavenly law techniques, and the energy pearls with the sages of the Golden Battalion greatly evened the balance and even tipped it around for their own good. According to Robin's initial estimation, when he sent the members of the Golden Battalion, they would be able to hold back the enemies for the first 2 hours, after which they would advance slowly by killing a few thousand of them, and they might even beat them into running away. But soon his eyebrows furrowed tightly. A few hours ago, about 20,000 sages and saints attacked them, and now, after an intense battle against the sages of the Golden Battalion for just a little less than 4 hours, the number of enemies has become 22,000. Did they receive reinforcements estimated at 2,000 saints and sages?
Impossible.
They have suffered heavy losses since they engaged with the members of the Golden Battalion. And even at this moment, one corpse after another is still falling under Robin's eyes. If Robin calculates the current killing rate, then during the past few hours about 5,000 enemies have been killed at least. This means that the reinforcements were at least 7,000. This means that up to now 27,000 saints and sages have attacked them since the moment they arrived on the planet, and the numbers are still increasing. Robin's heart clenched as his upper lip twitched. The 2 hours he had spent controlling himself and calming his nerves wasted away in an instant. He let out a long exhale again and shook his head vigorously. Now is not the time for this. The situation inside has been greatly regulated, but outside it has become very bad. When the 6,000 sages went out with Alexander, they were very angry at those humanoid white creatures as they killed a few dozen of their companions because of their sudden attack. So they attacked fiercely and pushed them back greatly so that some of them could even afford to stop for a minute and kill part of the ground forces as a form of entertainment. But this was no longer possible. All the golden troops that came out gathered on top of the dome like a group of frightened chickens, barely protecting each other's backs in front of the enemy's ferocious and suicidal attacks. Reuben put 2 fingers in his mouth and gave a loud whistle, then yelled as he looked up, "Alexander, get your men in and catch your breath. Victoria and the rest will take your places." This shout seemed to be directed at Alexander, but big moves started happening below. The fire forces began to increase the supply of the White Flame Dome to withstand the pressure until the replacement happened. The life forces participating in the dome began to make holes in the dome from the top so that Alexander and his soldiers could enter. Victoria and the 6,000 sages under her command also stood up and began to put on their helmets and quickly set their weapons, ready to go out. Caesar and Jabba also approached Victoria, telling her that want to go out with her. Although during the past hours, they came out of the dome more than once and wreaked havoc on the ground forces to relieve the pressure on the dome. This did not satisfy them. Only by killing a few sages can they say that they participated. Alexander let out a long sigh when he heard this, relieved, and quickly shouted several orders to his soldiers, and they started to slowly descend towards the openings in the dome. All the soldiers of the Golden faction displayed great strength again, and started to push back the saints and sages of the enemy with their most powerful long-range attacks without caring about wasting their energy, as in a few seconds they will finally take a break from this nightmare. But at that moment, Alexander and his 6,000 soldiers began to fall down with lifeless eyes, like dolls whose ropes had been cut. The sounds of bodies colliding with the ground resounded throughout the dome. Each sound would be entering their ears but shaking their hearts. Life seemed to have come to a complete halt inside the White Flame Dome. Victoria and her soldiers, who were preparing to take off and replace Alexander, remained in place. Whoever was running to stand in his position stopped in his place with his foot hanging in the air. Whoever was putting on his helmet froze in position, placing his hands on his head. Even the life forces and flame forces forgot for a moment their mission and stopped pumping life energy and white flames into the dome, focusing their popping eyes on the terrifying sight before them. Everyone's eyes were already focused on the top when Alexander and the other 6,000 sages were trying to retreat with difficulty towards the openings that the forces of life had made for them. Some think of supporting them if something sudden happens, and who thinks of taking their place when they come down, and who think of increasing the number of openings or closing them to help these men entering with ease while preventing the saints and sages of the humanoid white creatures from entering. But everything changed in an instant. The sky suddenly turned black. Extremely dark clouds appeared out of nowhere that covered the sky as far as the eye could see, obscuring with it any source of light other than the faint light of the White Flame Dome. But the absolute darkness did not last long. The clouds began to rain white bluish thunderbolts suddenly, striking down Alexander and the 6,000 sages. Everything happened in an instant. If Robin wasn't looking up too when it happened, he would have accused whoever reported this of lying. But he saw everything. 6,000 thunderbolts fell at the same moment vertically, as if they were a pillar supporting the sky, each one as thick as an ancient tree, and each one struck a sage without room for error. Robin was the first to wake up from the shock, It took him tremendous willpower to be able to move his foot for the first few steps, after which he started running towards the golden body's reign. Alexander. My big brother was up with them. No. Robin's move finally brought balance to the rest of the Golden Battalion. Some of them started to shout and some of them fell to the ground on the spot out of sheer horror, but without exception, sooner or later they all started running toward the falling bodies. Boom! At that moment, a large ground explosion is heard and Jabba's voice reverberates throughout the dome as he points his hammer at the forces of fire and the forces of life. What the hell are you doing? Do you all want to kill the rest of us as well? Re-inject your energy into the dome right now, you bastards. The white flame dome is alive and does not need permanent control or permanent injection of energy. It can defend itself as soon as it is formed and work with no regard to how little energy it has. But in the end, its power is limited and it can't support itself. There is no source of its nourishment except for continuous support with flame energy and life energy. The forces of humanoid white creatures, both on the ground and in the air, took advantage of what had just happened and began raining down attacks on the dome with great zeal. For the first time since its formation, the dome began to be riddled with many holes. A few saints and sages of white human creatures tried to exploit the holes and enter, but the dome manipulated the places of the holes and prevented them from entering, but nevertheless, the holes still appeared very rapidly and grew larger. Within a few more seconds, the dome would be completely torn apart. Only after hearing Jabba's shout did the life forces and fire forces return to inject energy into the dome again. In an amount less than half the previous rate, however, they grit their teeth and look at the ground as the dome began to slowly heal. Jabba's facial features turned and he saw what was happening. He was fully aware that they were all now thinking the same thing. What is the point of all this? Jabba wanted to give some encouraging talk, but what could he possibly say to lift their spirits? Even he needs someone to cheer him up. In the blink of an eye, 6,000 sages were killed. Was it that who killed them could not kill the rest? Why would they bother with feeding the white flame dome anymore? There is no war of attrition. There is no way out of here. But at that moment everyone heard two words that gave them back some hope. He is alive. My brother. You are breathing? Open your eyes, my friend. Open your eyes. The smiles on their faces returned when they heard these words. But in the midst of the shouts, a sobbing was heard, as someone said, "He is dead. Edgar Frost's heart has stopped beating. This brother is dead too." Robin did not go towards a specific person like the rest, but as soon as he reached the spot where Alexander and the rest of the sages fell, he slowed down and started walking among them, looking to his right and left with knotted eyebrows, and eyes shining with bright golden glimmer. So far, he had passed by over 300 sages who had fallen to the ground. 40 of them were dead and the rest were between life and death. If this rate were to be generalized to all the sages who had been struck by the lightning, then the Golden Army would have lost a few hundred sages in that instant, and over 5,000 sages had lost the ability to fight in the near future, that is if they escaped death right now. The only good thing about it was that those sages had already begun to enter the dome when the thunderbolts descended. So all 6,000 sages had fallen within the boundaries of the dome. Not a single one had descended outside of it. If this had happened, it would have been very difficult to bring them back with such spirits that had fallen to the ground. The sages who were still alive started to receive intensive treatment, but life had not returned to their eyes yet, and it was not yet known if they could be saved. It was not even known what harmed them in the first place. The heavenly lightning law was not a strange thing for Robin, as it is the major heavenly law used by Jabba's tribe, and it was one of the laws that Robin made a cultivation technique for all the way to the third stage back in Planet Nahari. But those lightning bolts that had just landed just now were unlike anything he had seen before. These thick lightning bolts, even though they appeared to be extremely pure without any pollutants from other laws, weren't something of the normal major heavenly law of thunder either. With a few more steps, Robin reached Alexander's location. That was the most crowded point currently inside the White Flame Dome. Old Gu, Elizabeth, and Victoria had all arrived before him, along with many sages from the Levon family. All of them gathered around Alexander to see what was happening to him and try to help. In fact, Alexander was the least affected by the attack. He was presently lying semi-naked on a bed of green plants that Elizabeth had prepared for him. He apparently has been stripped of his armor to evaluate his injuries more properly. His breathing was inconsistent and his heartbeat was very slow. Most of the skin on his body had turned coal black and some of it had already fallen off, showing the charred flesh underneath. Blood was pouring from all the orifices of his face, and it could easily be sensed that he had received severe internal injuries. And despite all this damage, he was the only one among the 6,000 sages who is still conscious. But those around him wished he had passed out too. Alexander's eyes were unsteady. It seemed as if he wanted to scream from the severity of the pain, but he could not get a sound out of his charred throat. It seemed as if he wanted to cry, but a tear did not come down from his dry eyes. Herr Robin gave a long sigh and took another step, then extended his hand and placed it on Alexander's forehead. Gentle spiritual energy started to seep from his hand and permeate Alexander's head, soothing him, and after a few seconds he finally closed his eyes, sleeping. Zara, let only 500 saints from your troop take care of providing life energy for the dome. As for you personally and the rest of your troop would come here to heal the most affected, and temporarily use vitality talismans on the better off ones. Robin sighed again and gave orders. Yes. Zara nodded and headed back toward the dome, starting to reduce the number of those in charge of it and leading the rest of her forces toward the injured. Boom, boom, boom. Your Excellency, Elizabeth called in a low, unsure voice. The life forces are no more than 2,000 saints and sages, divided into two teams. The first is made up of 1,000 soldiers, and those are based on providing life energy for the White Flame Dome. And the second team is waiting to receive its turn and do the same job when the first team gets tired. The first team had spent about 4 hours maintaining the White Flame Dome and were already exhausted. They were about to switch with the second team after Alexander and his soldiers entered the dome. But Robin's orders now reduced the number of the first team in half and kept them in their positions, and withdrew the other 1,500 soldiers to work on healing these severe injuries, which are no less energy and mentally consuming than supporting the dome. But at the same time, there are currently more than 5,000 sages on the verge of death. If Robin does not make this decision, they will all die without a doubt. Those are 5,000 sages, the pillar of his army. They can't be allowed to die. Whether it is the fighting power or the morale of the army, it will collapse instantly if he didn't support these 5,000 sages. The war would be lost, and the rest of his army would soon follow those 5,000 sages to their graves. If he could pull the other 500 life force soldiers, he will pull them without hesitation. The thing is, those 500 life law users would have undoubtedly been able to withstand the confrontation against the ground forces. But now that the first line of air defense that was represented by Alexander and the 6,000 sages had disappeared, the attacks of more than 25,000 saints and sages of the forces, the humanoid white creatures, came back to rain the dome with direct attacks again. How long can these 500 life law users hold out? Robin didn't answer Elizabeth's plea. How could he not know what she wanted to say? But what can he do in a situation like this? Zara and the rest of her 1,500 life forces started running like crazy among the injured, throwing vitality talismans on this one and injecting life energy into that one, yelling at each other to speed up and shouting at the spectators to move back and make way for them. Your Excellency, Old Gu was the one who shouted this time, requiring new orders from Robin to deal with the situation. But Robin didn't reply again, just put his index finger to his mouth, asking those around him to quiet. Then he kept his eyes still shining golden glimmer on Alexander's body. The longer he looked, the deeper the knot in his eyebrows became. The moment Alexander was struck by the lightning, he had his full body armor on, and even his shield was held up high to protect him from the enemy attack until he entered the dome. Robin saw everything clearly. That thunderbolt went through his shield and his body armor first. So how can he receive such damage? It seemed as if the thunderbolt ignored the divine armor covering Alexander and directly struck his body somehow. The body armors contain layer upon layer of safety for its user. If such damage reached the user's body, it means that the body armor was destroyed. That is especially so for the body armor of Alexander and the rest of the generals. They were made of extremely solid metals and had bigger runes that are better effective than the rest. Destroying them and delivering damage to the body of its owner is very difficult. But there comes another mystery. Alexander's body armors lay beside him, as good as new, without a single scratch. There was no damage that had been done to the runes on them either. They had simply not received any damage from the thunderbolt, as if they are not there, they had been ignored. It is not like lightning can run through metals or something like that. Robin has full knowledge of these natural elements and its effect, especially the lightning that he researched up to the 3rd level before. Of course, there were countermeasures for these effects on the divine armor. And even ignoring these countermeasures for the natural effect, a sage's body can handle that with ease. The most important part in defense against these law attacks is against the energy contained in it. The energy the user put into his attack is the main ingredient behind the attack. It doesn't matter how high the stage of law you study if you don't have enough energy to use it. And this energy specifically was supposed to be stopped and absorbed by the divine armor the moment they met, only getting through if the divine armor was wrecked. So ignoring the natural effect of the lightning law, how can this much energy pass through the divine armor? Is it that the attacker had countermeasures to his countermeasures or something, stopping the body armor and shield from doing their work, or was it the natural law effect that struck Alexander? Robin shook his head when thinking about this. The laws are everywhere in nature with all stages from one to who knows how high. The law doesn't just decide to take sided and struck people dead on its own. There has to be someone who uses them, and there has to be the energy behind the attack for that to happen, and that energy was what needed to be stopped by the divine armor. Robin started to rub his forehead for a second, then looked at Alexander again. There was another aspect that is need to be taken into consideration. The damage inflicted on Alexander was simply enormous. Someone like Old Goo could not deal such damage against Alexander with a single direct strike, even if he used the Divine Decree incarnation technique in his attack. Robin roamed around in Old Goo's memories back then and knew very well the strength limits of people at the half-step level of the Emperor's realm and knew how tough their bodies were as well. A thunderbolt that could deal such damage to Alexander was undoubtedly far beyond the limits of a sage. The power of the lightning attack exceeded the limits of the sagehood realm. It exceeded the limits of the sagehood realm. The sound of cracking bones was suddenly heard from Robin's fists, and everyone could see his features contorted as his train of thought reached this point. What is more powerful than sagehood realm? Emperor realm. The difference between the 3rd degree and the 4th degree of any law is extremely wide, and therefore the power gap between an emperor and the power of a sage is also very wide. It is nowhere near the same as the difference between a saint and a sage. 5 or 6 strong saints can group up to attack a sage and defeat him or even kill him in some extreme cases. According to the gap that Reuben felt between the 3rd and 4th stages of heavenly laws, even hundreds of sages wouldn't be able to fight a single emperor. They wouldn't even be able to keep him busy. It's not like an emperor has a strength equal to hundreds of sages combined if they are put on a scale. That is not the case. It is that an emperor's strength and speed give him enough momentum to roam as he wants wherever he wants and kill whoever he wants. Even hundreds of sages will not be able to stop him, let alone defeat him. The appearance of an emperor on a battlefield is very similar to the scene of a battle between chickens and ducks, and suddenly an ostrich appeared. This has been Robin's main concern since he decided to take revenge on the northern region of Nahari. How does he do it? The idea of great war battles, plans, traps, and other tactics that gave him everything he had today seemed like nothing before an emperor. Until this day, he had not been able to find anything that could defeat an emperor or even stop him. Only an emperor could fight an emperor. Was the previous attack from an Emperor realm expert? If there were Emperor-level experts here, what were they doing on this damn planet? I asked the all-seeing God for planets to collect resources, train the army, strengthen the foundations of the true beginning empire, and finally to see new environments that might help me make progress towards the 3rd stage of the Master Law of Truth. How did that bastard understand that I wanted to engage in a life and death battle on a planet that contains Emperor-level experts? Robin's bottom lip trembled with rage as he thought about it. But the all-seeing God said that there are no Emperor's realm experts in this world. Was he lying? Is this his punishment for yelling at him that day and increasing his demands to complete the task? If this was true, I swear I would. Arg! What exactly is this situation? He ran away from dealing with the situation in Nahari and came here to gather ideas on how to confront an emperor, maybe gather some useful weapons, or even better, reach the 3rd stage of the Master Law of Truth and make his own emperors. But in the end, he came back to face the emperors here too. Wouldn't it have been better if the all-seeing God refused his request outright and told him to strive in a Nahari? If he had to face the emperors anyway, why would he mess with emperors of another world that he had no problem with? Robin sighed, stopping himself when he reached this point. What is the point of thinking about this now? Rather, what can be done to the all-seeing God, even if he gave him false information? Reuben shook his head and looked up with furrowed eyebrows. From behind the more than 22,000 saints and sages still raining attacks on the dome, the dark clouds that clouded the sky for a moment just started to dissipate as if nothing had happened. Something is not right. If someone this strong is leading this war against us, why didn't he strike from the beginning? And why did he retreat again now after showing himself? Why doesn't he finish what he started? He then looked down at Alexander, and then towards the rest of the corpses and the rest of the injured sages lying on the ground. An emperor's power far exceeded that of the sages. The attack killed all the low-level sages and severely wounded all middle-level sages or higher. A direct attack from an emperor theoretically could actually do this to an individual sage or even a small group. But for one attack to take down 6,000 sages? Is this normal for emperors? Robin had never seen an emperor before and certainly didn't see an all-out attack from him. But an emperor attack definitely wouldn't do such damage. In the end, an emperor is just someone who uses the fourth level of laws, and no matter how strong an emperor or even a peak emperor realm is, he still has a limited amount of energy within his body. A person who has a mortal body cannot produce this amount of energy at once. This is beyond the capacity a normal mortal body. Robin doesn't know what lies beyond the emperor's realm, but he knows one thing very well: even 10 emperors wouldn't be able to produce that attack. While Robin was thinking, it seemed as if he had forgotten that he was still moving his eyes over the corpses and the bodies of the injured. It seemed as if he could not see them in the first place because of his busy mind, which was working at full speed, until his eyes reached a few individuals lying next to each other. Although their features were badly burned, he could identify them easily. They had been inside the dome the whole time. They had participated in killing the humanoid white creatures that had entered the middle of the formation. They had gathered around Victoria to take the place of Alexander and the rest after they got in, but they were something else very important. They were the first to start flying upwards to meet up with Alexander and his troops. Their appearance now means that they were struck by lightning while flying inside the dome. Wait! Robin suddenly raised his eyebrows and muttered. Lightning can enter the dome? So why did the attack only hit those who were flying? Old Goo, Elizabeth, and the rest looked at each other from the corners of their eyes, some with questioning looks and some shrugged their shoulders as if they didn't know the answer. Many of them only thought about this point just now. Everything happened very quickly, and all those lightning bolts appeared at once in this pitch-black darkness that blinded them temporarily. Thinking about it, this is really something really strange. But in the end, they stopped thinking about it and let out a long exhale when they heard Robin. At least they now know that he is thinking about the situation and trying to find solutions, and he did not suffer a nervous breakdown as they thought. If the attacker was a person who had the freedom to act and choose the targets, it would have been natural to attack the army joints and kill them first, for example attacking the commander, me, the generals, and all high-level sages, or even he had to kill the life forces and fire forces who activate the white flame dome, destroying our shelter with it. Why did he just hit all the flying ones? The leader of those humanoid white creatures has proven his intelligence more than once. How could he not understand such a simple logic? Robin put his hand under his chin and furrowed his eyebrows. What if the leader of those humanoid white creatures didn't control the lightning attack? Then what was it? Something that only targets flying people at that moment. What is it? A weapon? An array? Some kind of a spell? How often can this attack be activated? What is its maximum range? Why did the commander of the forces wait until now to activate it? Robin's eyebrows sank more and more as he thought about the matter, the number of unanswered questions increasing frighteningly. But something finally cleared up. The bad feeling that had kept him from giving the order to fly ever since landing on this planet had vanished. Boom! Your Excellency! Old Goo looked around like a madman and called out to Robin at the top of his voice. Although he realizes that Robin is deeply thinking about what is happening around them, the situation will not wait for him to think deeply. Something must be done immediately. The attacks on the white flame dome took an extremely dangerous turn. Over 22,000 sages and saints outside are raining down attacks on the dome from all directions at the same time, causing enormous pressure on the dome, which was already filled with holes. And although the dome can move the amount of energy available to counter any attack instantly, this puts huge pressure on the life forces. The life forces whose number has decreased by half. And from below, millions of humanoid white creatures charged toward the white flame dome with wrath and vengeful spirit. Although these creatures are very weak and their attacks pose no threat compared to the attacks descending from above, they use their own bodies as a means of consuming the white flames by throwing themselves at the dome. They also force the dome to use a large amount of energy to block them and prevent them from entering from below. Under all this enormous pressure, the life forces and the fire forces began to take steps back. Yes, the steps that they took forward previously to expand the command center and cut off the road in front of the enemy ground hordes, now they are forced to take those steps back again. As the smaller the size of the dome, the easier it will be to control it and defending it, and it will also require less effort and energy. Although no order was issued to the life forces and the fire forces to take those steps back, they had no choice. The white flame dome was about to collapse. However, this was not without risks. As they took those steps back, a road began to open up from the sides towards the top of the hill, and with that, the dome slowly began to be placed under land siege again. Although the plant forces had no say in the retreat process, however, they were definitely put under pressure no less than life forces and flame forces. The more the enemy saints and sages were left unchecked, the more they tried to attack from underground again, putting them under intense pressure. Even the plant force members who had previously fainted from fatigue earlier weren't let off. They were kicked awake and forced to take part in the defense. Old Gu was not hoping to achieve anything with his shout this time. He knew that someone like Robin would not wait for a shout from him to make a decision. Rather, it was his way to relieve the sensation of panic he felt. In the end, even a seasoned commander who led an empire for about 2,000 years and then oversaw his son's era, he had no idea what was going on right now, and he definitely wouldn't want to be the one giving the orders in a situation like this. But to his surprise, Reuben finally took his eyes off Alexander's body and spoke as he pointed towards the top of the hill. "Why are you still here? Don't you realize what just happened? Whoever he isn't participating in the flame dome or healing, or not participating in defending the headquarters ground or participating in making a raise, get the hell out of the dome immediately and fight." "What? This?" Robin's sudden order took everyone by surprise. The blood that was boiling in their veins a moment ago subsided. The shouts asking Robin to think of a solution disappeared, and the looks that almost penetrated Robin's body were neutralized. Everyone stood still and with uncertain looks. With a quick glance at the faces around him, Robin realized what was happening. They thought he had decided to fight to their death. But even the intent to fight to the death was no longer present. They were terrified after those thunderbolts landed, and the option of direct confrontation did not occur to them for a moment. Earlier they were army against army. Even if those humanoid white things had tens of times their numbers, they would still dare to fight. But now, those thunderbolts are out of their league. They are not something they can confront. If a mortal encountered a lion and had nowhere to run to, he would surely try to put up a fight, convincing himself that he might scare the lion away after he loses a limb or two. With this thought in his head, he would fight bravely to the end because he would have hope until he draws his last breath. But what happens when a mortal meets the 200 feet long blood earth python? He would just stand there with tears in his eyes and piss in his pants. Fight? It wouldn't cross his mind. Robin understood this, and if he were in their shoes and had no idea of what is going on, he would also be frightened. Who would wish to face such a force? What is the point of even making a confrontation at this point? Perhaps they were all waiting for Robin to think of a plan to escape or surrender. The courage and enthusiasm of conquering a new planet disappeared irreversibly with those thunderbolts, and their survival instinct kicked in. But the thing is, even if Robin wanted to surrender, would those creatures allow him to do so? They look like they want to eat them alive. Secondly, Robin did not ask them to go out and fight to their death as they think. The 6,000 thunderbolts. It contained patterns Robin hadn't seen before, having a ridiculously wide range, ignoring the presence of divine armors and the presence of the white flame dome, only striking down the flying individuals. Everything about those lightning bolts hinted at something in the dark. This wasn't just a strong enemy's all-out attack. Even ignoring all that, the most important hint is the moment that the attack is activated. The moment of switching between the exhausted and the new forces, or rather, the moment of the landing of 6,000 sages. Those 6,000 sages were the largest number that had flown out of Robin's army at one point, and they had been flying above for close to 4 hours, yet they had been hit the moment they were landing. Why? There are many reasons that might lead to such a decision, but the most logical explanation is that the person controlling the attack was waiting for more members of Robin's army, or perhaps all of them to fly up before activating the attack. But his patience ran out when he felt that those 6,000 were approaching the ground, so he decided to finally strike. What does this say? Firstly, the person controlling the lightning attack was not watching the battle himself. If he was watching what was happening inside the dome, he would have known that there were 6,000 more sages who were preparing to come out. If he had waited another minute, he would have struck and killed the 6,000 new sages. If he waited and struck down Victoria and her sages, then it would have been game over for sure. Half of his sages would be completely exhausted and the other half would be half dead. This way Robin's main forces would have truly been crippled. Secondly, that attack cannot be used continuously, otherwise, he would have used it from the beginning and whoever activated it would not have had to wait this long before using it. It is not like he can relax and watch the amusing fight. He absolutely couldn't use it before and could not wait any longer now. Why? That is simple. For every minute the leader of these humanoid white creatures delayed using these thunderbolts, a saint or sage of his followers was slaughtered, and thousands of his ground forces were killed. If he can use it from the start, he would have saved more than 7,000 sages and saints from his army. This means that this terrifying attack will probably not be used again for a long time. But how can he convince his forces to go out and fight with their current morale? Robin moved his eyes between Elizabeth, Victoria, Old Goo, and the other top-level sages standing around him, then asked out of nowhere, "You all know now that those lightning bolts can pierce the dome, right?" Everyone nodded. This was one of the things that mostly crushed their confidence. If only those attacks were outside, they simply wouldn't come out. They could probably stay inside the dome and strengthen it until they find a solution. In the end, as long as they had a safe haven, they would be able to negotiate with those creatures even if it took months or years. But reality had a different opinion. Some of you may have noticed that all of those killed by the lightning bolts were low-ranking sages, and all of those who were attacked were all flying, right? Robin asked again. Some of them asked and looked around while others nodded. Everything happened very quickly. Since the lightning strike and until this moment only 5 minutes have passed, and a few of them have not yet reached such observations. Robin nodded a few times slowly, then started to lift off the ground. "Your Excellency!" Old Goo and the rest shouted in one breath, panic evident on their faces. Robin from the beginning has been standing at the heart of the army, issuing all decisions and moving the army as he wants. Even the stupidest person among those humanoid white creatures will know that he is their leader. That person who sent the thunderbolts will definitely attack him now that he has left the ground, and on top of that Robin is still just a saint. Any one of those lightning bolts would be enough to turn him into ashes. They have to protect Robin. It's their hope to get home. They have to bring him back to Earth immediately. But none of them dared to fly after him. Fear gripped their hearts and feet. Robin continued to climb upwards, then slowly increased his speed until he reached the boundary of the white flame dome and stopped in front of it. Boom, boom, boom. The white flame dome had already reached a critical stage. The number of holes in it had become very dangerous, and the dome was currently not even 40% complete. At this point in front of Robin, the dome was opening and closing in fractions of a second, while the distance between him and the nearest saint of humanoid white creatures did not exceed 2 feet. Perhaps if one of them extended his hand he would touch the other. Robin let out a sneering laugh at that humanoid saint, then looked down at his followers. That thunder attack won't happen again anytime soon. Head towards the top of the hill and fight with all your might. But for your safety, most of you stay on the ground. Shoot them from below. Even if you don't hit them, at least disperse them and keep them away from the dome. At the same time, I want only 500 sages in flight mode. They will be the real offensive arm of our forces. Those sages must be at the level of the middle sagehood realm or higher, and when one of them gets tired, he has to land. Another sage takes his place. 500 sages. All the sages started to look at each other with sidelong glances. Now they know why Robin is flying in front of them. He wants to prove to them that that attack will not be repeated. But he is still one person. What if that person is waiting for large numbers again? What would happen if 500 of them went up and got hit? They knew Robin asked that all of the 500 sages be above level 34 to withstand the thunderbolts if it came down again and don't get directly killed like the low-level sages, but how useful is that? Those middle, high, and top-level sages who were struck by the thunderbolts are all on the ground now between life and death. Their survival isn't even 50% granted. TCH. Move your ass, motherfuckers. You think I'm asking your permission? This is direct order. Robin suddenly shouted in annoyance when he saw their hesitation. All the sages present had sworn to obey Robin, so he really didn't need to say much. Whoever refused to move now would risk breaking the oath and die. But he softened his yelling again when he saw that moving them by force would only result in an increase in the death toll, as he added, "Don't worry, this is a bet in your eyes, but I'm 100% sure of my calculations. I'll lead the first 500 sages myself." "Father!" Caesar shouted and quickly flew to Robin's side. "You said it's a bet. Even if there's 1% that you are wrong, I won't let you get out of here. If you want someone to lead the first group, it will be me and no one else. Even if no one came with me, I will fight alone." The Burton family saints loudly shouted their readiness to march. "I'm ready too." Jabba slammed on his chest from below and shouted, "Wind forces, gather, we will head out." Peon didn't bother saying any more and was already gathering his followers. At this moment, a loud bone-clacking sound emitted from Old Goo, before everyone could hear him saying with a sigh, "Hey, it seems that the life we spent in prosperity has made us forget what war is. I, a soldier, have been reluctant to carry out an order from my superior. What a shame." Then he bowed towards Robin. "Your Excellency, you are too important to be put in danger. You are our only hope now. If you do not wish to apply martial law against me now and cut off my head, please allow me to lead the charge." Robin looked long at Old Goo, then nodded. "Thank you, Your Excellency." Old Goo let out a long sigh and immediately started preparing the army and preparing the first wave of sages. Robin stood there and continued to watch. It was clear that Old Goo and all the sages he has chosen for the first wave were still afraid. But they stood in their ranks and received their orders and acted upon them. Quite unlike them, the Burton family saints had no such showing fear. They were moving with enthusiasm and with facial expressions topped by cruelty and thirst for blood. Robin sighed when he saw this. No matter how powerful the soldiers are and how much they train, practical warfare has a different character. Only situations like this can make real soldiers. The long period of peace in the four empires on planet Jura made it prosper faster and take hurried steps towards higher energy levels compared to the rest of the planets of the same martial age, which is only 60,000 years, but it also made their men weak inside. On the other hand, the ancestral land was far behind in terms of cultivation technique, how to make the best use of cultivation resources, and so on. They had one thing that gave them an edge over the four empires, which is the constant state of wars. That edge can be written off if a direct conflict happened between the four empires and the ancestral continent because of the sheer gap in power. But when both parties are at the same level now, the edge of the ancestral continent residents would start to show effect. This was one of the reasons I brought them here anyway. Robin thought as he watched them move. Robin steadied himself, hovering near the upper border of the dome. As he watched tens of thousands of his soldiers emerge from the dome one after another, raising their shields with one hand and launching attacks with the other. After the last soldier exited, the wall of the white flame dome behind him immediately closed, and seconds later all the other holes in the dome were closed as well. The exit of those forces attracted the attention of the saints and sages of the humanoid white creatures, and a fierce battle immediately started up the hill. All the attacks that had been descending on the white flame dome previously now started descending upon the soldiers of the Golden Battalion instead, relieving most of the pressure on the dome once again. But even though the enemies numbered a little more than 22,000, while the number of soldiers of the Golden Battalion that emerged from the dome reached 40,000, in addition to the quality of the law techniques and divine weapons all in the favor of the Golden Battalion as well, the battle was not one-sided at all. As expected, the high ground always has the advantage. The superiority of the soldiers of the Golden Battalion in numbers and equipment did not contribute to anything except that they were able to preserve their lives and balance the equation against their flying enemies. And perhaps if it were not for Old Gu leading 500 of the strongest sages in the Golden Battalion now and moving them like an arrow penetrating the ranks of the enemies, the scales would have tilted in favor of humanoid white creatures already. But this balance did not last long. After only a quarter of an hour, the balance began to tilt clearly in favor of the Golden Battalion. After a quarter of an hour had passed without those lightning clouds appearing again, the members of the Golden Battalion began to gain confidence to fight with all their might again. Old Gu and the sages above started to press harder, and the rest of the army below gradually moved to heavily attack instead of passive defense. Especially the wind forces who combined a minor heavenly law of the space path with the major heavenly law of wind. Their ability to hunt down enemies from below with their arrows was the Golden Battalion's greatest weapon. They single-handedly caused over 80% of the total kills so far. The number of deaths among saints and sages among the enemies began to increase rapidly. They were dying even faster than in their battle against Alexander and the 6,000 sages. Heh! Robin let out a long sigh when he saw this. He didn't know whether to be happy or sad. He was now seeing with his own eyes the difference between performing the task by force and performing it with conviction. The transformation that the Golden Battalion was witnessing now told him one thing: they absolutely did not trust his judgment a while ago and were afraid to get out. And now that they had experienced for themselves that there was a hope of annihilating a large number of those saints and sages before a new attack wave arrived, they began to put much more effort. Even the Burton family saints who had come out with killing intent were starting to show higher martial abilities now. Apparently even they were a bit worried when they were coming out. There is no doubt that soldiers need practical experience to deal with these difficult situations, but the most important thing is that they need to trust their commander blindly. They currently do not have the first, and they do not know Robin well to have the second either. Gaining experience is a bit easy. All he has to do is throw them into battle after battle, and whoever survives will surely become an expert. But the second is more difficult, as he personally has to win every battle he throws them in order to gain their absolute trust. Only then will they carry out Robin's orders without a single bit of hesitation, because they are sure his order is the right one, not because they have to do it. I think it's an inevitable process, Robin thought, then looked down at the walls of the white flame dome. 1, 2. After greatly reducing the pressure on them, the fire forces and the life forces returned to advance again and compensate for the steps they forcibly retreated a short while ago. In those short few minutes they retreated in, there were already tens of thousands of humanoid white creatures passing through both sides of the dome and surrounding it once again. But now that they have regained their breath, it is time to rectify this mistake. The path up the hill was quickly blocked again, and a large number of hordes of humanoid white creatures were incinerated. As for those who actually managed to reach the top of the hill would have to face 40,000 soldiers of the Golden Battalion, so they could be considered dead already. The pressure also eased a lot on the plant forces. Some of them even left their places and went to help the life forces treat the fallen sages. Seeing that everything had settled down again, Robin's gaze fell toward the middle of the dome, on 17 milky white individuals kneeling on the ground with their hands tied behind their backs. They were the prisoners who were caught by the wind forces after activating the dome. With a quick movement, Robin appeared in front of them, with his majestic golden armor and golden eyes exuding clear killing intent. His presence forced the few wind force soldiers guarding the prisoners to bow without thinking. Robin moved his eyes slowly at those prisoners, trying to understand something from their reactions to his arrival with this intent to kill in front of them. But he did not find anything of fear, awe, or even some panic. The only thing he found was a more intense killing intent. Robin furrowed his brows. The most dangerous thing he had witnessed since arriving in this world was not the numbers of those creatures, nor their schemes, nor even the lightning attack, but rather their intention to die for victory. He, the ruler of planet Jura, saw for himself what happens when he gives orders that the soldiers think may lead to death, so he knows very well what it means to have such soldiers under the command of any commander. In fact, he is beginning to feel some envy towards the person who moves them. Robin took another 2 steps toward the strongest prisoner among them, with a strength roughly equal to a knight at level 14. Then he got down on one knee in front of him, then raised his hands and tightly gripped his head, and muttered in a bone-chilling voice, "You have had your mystery long enough now. Show me everything you know. Robin's expression turned completely serious. He had intended to do soul research since the moment he arrived on this planet, but he basically didn't have enough energy to carry out something high-level like soul research, so he had to wait for him to recover with food and energy gems. But the moment he recovered, his health thunderbolts descended and the soul quest plan was postponed again. Now the moment had finally arrived. Now he finally gets to know what really goes on behind the scenes. TSK, I probably won't be able to get the full truth from this low-ranking knight, but capturing a saint and sage outside is not a practical idea either. Capturing or killing someone with the strength of a saint or higher is like the difference between heaven and earth. First, his comrades wouldn't let him get caught. Secondly, he could simply blow up himself if he was caught, and Robin thought while activating the soul search technique, but his train of thought was suddenly cut off. What the? Ah! Suddenly Robin's cry resounded throughout the dome. Your Excellency! Ah! What do we do? Let me go, you son of a... Robin cried out loudly as his features turned to the worst. If you don't give me a path, then I will take you down with me. Boom! Your Excellency! Immediately after Robin's last shout, a powerful wave of formless energy shook every soul inside and outside the dome. Before anyone realized what was happening, Robin was lying 50 meters away from his original place, passed out, as if his pupils were pushed back into his skull. Ah! His Excellency has fallen. The Wind Saints ran towards Robin. Zara and a few sages from the life forces let go of what they had in their hands and ran towards him like madmen. The pillar supporting their sky had fallen. Everything seemed to move in slow motion for a moment. Only the people who could not leave their positions held their ground, but they felt their hearts being ripped out of their chests. His Excellency, muttered one of the fire forces responsible for feeding the dome of white flames, looking down toward his feet with eyes filled with tears. Then, he looked up at the faces of the humanoid white creatures with eyes filled with killing intent and shouted, I swear that if something happened to His Excellency, I would not forgive you? Before that soldier could complete his threat, he stopped and opened his eyes to the last of them. The humanoid white creatures outside were standing in their places looking at each other in stupefaction. When they heard the flame soldier's cry, a look of fear appeared on them and they started to retreat. Not only them but all the saints and sages above also stopped and started to look around in shock. Then each one shot off in a different direction, not looking back again. The battle has stopped. Sigh, that was a powerful soul attack. If I hadn't placed a great deal of importance on raising my soul strength, it might have been destroyed by mere contact with that thing. In the end, I couldn't avenge Mila, nor save Richard, Emperor of the planet Jura, Heaven's chosen. It turned out that I was just a petty character in the end. I led myself to death in a place that had nothing to do with me. I wonder if the owner of that soul died too. I bet that would greatly ease the burden on my guys. They might be able to return to Jura now if they built the space portal. But, hey, I'm the only link that unites them, Alexander and Old Goo, Victoria and Elizabeth, and the Burton family saints won't listen to each other, and Caesar doesn't have enough strength to unite them fully under his command yet. After my death, the army will undoubtedly disintegrate. If my fall causes the Golden Battalion to disintegrate and led them to their death, only then will I feel that I died in vain. I'm dead. Why can I think? Slowly opens his eyes. TSK, even the dim candlelight can hurt me now? Looks like my soul got severely injured in that soul battle and I can see candlelight. I am alive. Robin tried to raise his head gradually with half-closed eyes and blurred vision, and with ears that could hear nothing but a lot of buzzing as if thousands of bees were flying in circles around his head. Even after about 2 seconds of looking around, he could only see that he was in a closed space, and there were a few golden objects scattered around him. Ah! His Excellency has woken up. Thank the heavens. I will go tell General Caesar. I'm going to check his pulse. When the individuals in the room noticed Robin's movement, it looked as if scorpions had stung them. They went from sitting dejectedly to running around in a panic. Although Robin did not hear anything from them clearly, the feelings of fear and happiness were evident in their voices. So he was reassured and rested his head in its place again with a light smile. It seems that I'm still alive somehow, and in a safe zone at that. I actually managed to keep my life after facing that horrifying being. I always thought of the soul power as a way to help me formulate various techniques faster. Who would have thought that it would save my life today? Then he closed his eyes again, and with it the rest of his senses. This feeling, what does His Excellency do? One of the Life Force's soldiers furrowed his eyebrows after Robin rested his head again. The person who was feeling Robin's pulse also furrowed his brows for a few seconds before letting out a relieved sigh. Don't worry. He is using the soul replenishing technique.
Soul replenishing technique.
The rest in the tent raised their eyebrows slightly, but they soon understood. During those days, they tried more than once to treat him with the various laws of the life path, but to no avail. After many tries, they affirmed that the damage Robin suffered was not physical. Everyone here wasn't trying to heal Robin. They knew they can't. Their main job is to take turns checking Robin's condition every few minutes and providing him with easy-to-swallow food and enough drink to keep his body strong and healthy. Even though Robin is at level 30, he can stay for about 10 days without food, and this period would be longer if he was unconscious, but the point was not to preserve his life but rather to keep him strong all the time, as this would increase his chances of survival. The soul replenishing technique. This is one of the basic techniques of the soul path that His Excellency personally devised when he was still living in the afflicted Jura city, and it is one of the most basic techniques that were distributed to all of us before we came here. We were told that it is very important to revitalize and renew the soul. I remember it well because I had wondered what we might use it during the conquest of another planet. Considering now that His Excellency uses it to treat himself, only now did I know its value. Only now did they become certain that the damage that Robin had inflicted and made him unconscious during this time had something to do with the soul. I can't believe that His Excellency distributed this invaluable technique to us for free. He is really a great man. A great man. One of the Life Force's girls said while looking at Robin with eyes all looking up and in awe. Father! I heard that my father woke up? How is he? At this moment the tent curtain opened and Caesar came in shouting. When he saw that Robin was still lying in his place, he grabbed the shield of the nearest sage of the Life Forces and shouted at his face. What is going on here? Is this some kind of prank? Do you think fighting those damn creatures is so easy now that they are back and it's time for your little jokes? Maybe I should throw you guys in the front row. I would like to hear you laugh then. We dare not. That sage who was unfortunate enough to get into Caesar's hands shouted in panic. His Excellency did indeed wake up and raised his head, but he activated the soul replenishing technique and fell back to sleep again. It seems that there are injures in his soul that prevented him from moving. When Caesar heard this, he raised his eyebrows and let go of the sage's armor, took a few steps towards Robin, then furrowed his eyebrows again. Robin only distributed two techniques related to the soul. The first is the soul strengthening technique and the second is the soul replenishing technique. Other than the soul replenishing technique, they had no way to treat anything related to the soul, and this technique a person could only use on himself. No, even if they could help him using the soul replenishing technique, would it really help? This technique was made to restore clarity of mind and speed up the process of healing the soul after its exhaustion. Can it do anything to treat Robin from his injuries? Although I do not know what really happened. Father's cry and fall that day, and then his fainting for a few days says that he certainly did not receive any minor damage. Caesar thought as he kept examining Robin. But this is the current situation. None of them can do anything but stand on the side idly by and watch as Robin tries to do something to heal himself. Robin's achievements in the soul path can be said to be revolutionary in relation to their previous knowledge. Well, there was no previous knowledge of the planet Jura in the first place, they just knew it exists. But his colossal achievements now seem to be completely insufficient. After a few seconds, Caesar turned and moved toward the exit saying, "Keep up your good work." The Life Force saints and sages followed him until he came out and closed the curtain of the tent behind him, only then let out a long exhale. The adopted son of the Emperor of the world. Sometimes he acts spontaneously and gets close to his followers, which makes him popular among the members of the army, and sometimes the pressure that puts as the one and only sage of death exceeds even Robin somehow. With a few glances among themselves, the sages of the Life Force decided to summon Peon next time instead of Caesar. "Caesar, what is the news? How is His Excellency?" The moment Caesar came out of the cloud, there were a few people waiting. They were Victoria and Elizabeth and some other sages at the top of the sage realm. Even Alexander also came leaning on crutches with his body wrapped in bandages like a mummy. All of them furrowed their eyebrows and expressed fear as they waited for Caesar's reply. After all, his absence did not last long inside, and he went out alone without Robin. Caesar let out a long sigh and announced as he clenched his hands tightly. Father did indeed wake up, but he shut down his senses and activated the soul-replenishing technique. I checked it myself. As if a stone had finally been lifted from their chests. They all let out a long exhale and their expressions relaxed. Robin's fall that day shook their world. Only now their legs found solid ground to stand on again. But soon their features changed again. The soul-replenishing technique. He seems to have received a soul attack as we expected. Elizabeth sighed and spoke. Old Goose turned to the worst again after his first relief. His Excellency didn't distribute soul techniques for attacking or defending or even for healing soul wounds. We had sworn to work under his command, and he was so generous with us. How could he hide such techniques? It's most likely that he doesn't know them either. You mean? Victoria furrowed her eyebrows. In planet Jura, we had no knowledge of anything related to the reality of the soul before His Excellency appeared. He had no ground to lean on in his research. However, he came up with many techniques for it in a short period, so most of the research focused on strengthening the spirit and restoring its activity to help it in his research, and he also made some applications like the thoughts-conveying technique and the oath tablets. They were a bit narrow in scope and little in number, but they still alone are enough to say a lot about his capabilities. But from all that, this also tells us that this is probably the first time he is subjected to a soul attack. He does not know how to defend against an attack of this kind, and he must have been severely wounded because he resisted it bluntly. And now comes the bigger problem. He doesn't know how to heal himself from his soul injuries. His use of the soul-replenishing technique is proof enough of this. Caesar only looked at the ground and clenched his fists even more. Since he was certain that his father was using the soul-replenishing technique, he knew that the situation was bad. As he himself had used this technique more than once previously and knew its limits, the important thing now is that His Excellency is alive and has enough awareness to try to find a solution to his own problem. Because of his heroic sacrifice, he was able to end that death siege upon us, and we regained the initiative. What more do you expect from him? We are here to conquer a new world for him and expand his empire for him. We are the ones who have to bear the war, not him. Please don't expect any more help from His Excellency. Just pray that he will rise up for us again unharmed. It's our turn to prove to him that we are not useless. Caesar spoke with a clear heaviness in his voice while clenching both hands tightly, and it was clear that every word that came out of him was coming out with great difficulty. How is it that the soldiers could not do anything in front of those hordes of enemies, but Robin alone managed to save everyone and gave them a new chance? Their incompetence led his father to his current between life and death situation. But he quickly calmed himself and looked around with clear defiance, then began to rise from the ground. I will go to convey the report to the second commander-in-chief and receive his instructions. Now go back to your spots and wait for his orders. Old Goo, Victoria, Elizabeth, and the rest of the Peak Sage level nodded at the same time and flew away. There was no one left in front of the tent except Alexander, who found himself a relatively large rock near the tent and sat on it, looking with unfocused eyes at its door, as was the case for the past few days. Second Commander-in-Chief. Caesar landed on top of the hill and saluted, placing his right hand on his chest. Jabba looked behind him and shook his head with a self-ridiculing laugh. You know you don't have to do that. Caesar took a few more steps and stood beside Jabba looking up at the sky, and spoke. Until my adoptive father rises again, you will be the leader. Stop trying to evade your responsibility. Boom, boom, boom. You came alone. How is Master doing? Jabba was silent for a while and then suddenly asked, please visit. Alive. The situation isn't far from what you have predicted. Caesar replied sternly, then proceeded to explain what had just happened in the tent. Hey, good. That is actually much better than I expected. Jabba let out a long sigh, then gave a big smile and continued. His life is in his hands now, very good. What is very good exactly? Caesar furrowed his brows deeply and looked at Jabba. He had just told him about Robin's seemingly untreatable condition, but he smiled. Jabba looked to his side, still smiling. It makes me feel sometimes that you don't yet know who your adoptive father is, as long as his consciousness is still present enough to activate a technique. Then what is their fear? Now we only have to wait patiently for his return. Caesar's eyebrows relaxed a lot and let out a small sigh, as he looked up at Jabba's face with focused eyes. Absolute confidence. Is this the one you chose to be your only disciple, father? But he suddenly suppressed his thoughts and took a few steps to the side away from Jabba, and turned to look towards the sky again. Caesar is quite a tall man, with exactly 195 centimeters in height. He could be said to be one of the tallest in the Golden Battalion. But even with that, his head didn't even reach Jabba's chest. Him standing beside him and looking up at him like this. He looked like a little child asking his father to pick him up. The situation was very strange, so he had to run away quickly. Then he raised his voice again awkwardly. Cough, cough. What is the current situation? See for yourself. Jabba laughed it off and pointed in front of him, towards an aerial battle taking place in front of the cliff. It was not close to the battle that took place before Robin's incident. In fact, there were only 20 individuals involved. The battle was between 10 saints of the Burton family wearing nothing but short pants that hide their private parts, against 10 saints of the humanoid white creatures. The battle seemed random as all individuals could target each other, but by focusing a little, it was possible to see the cooperation between the members of each team and the teamwork to deliver the greatest possible damage to the second party. Although there were tens of thousands of saints and sages of the humanoid white creatures floating around the aerial arena, and a similar number of Golden Battalion troops fully armed with their divine gear standing on top of the hill behind Jabba, no big battle broke off as all sides quietly stood their places watching the ongoing mini-battle. The two teams fought without tricks, without advantages. Even their cultivation levels were identical, only military tactics, courage, and the quality of their techniques were of use. Everything about this mini-battle looked like a friendly tournament. If Robin woke up now and saw this scene, he would undoubtedly think he was still dreaming. 10 days ago, right after Robin collapsed. Devastating chaos. Panic struck everyone inside and outside the dome. Everyone inside rushed towards Robin, and everyone outside ran wherever their feet took them. No one understood what happened with Robin. They didn't know how to react or how to help him. They just ran to him out of pure instinct. But that wasn't even the most confusing thing at that moment. They were met with something more strange. The army that had been besieging them for hours and seemed that they had sworn to die with them today no longer exists. The whole army that had millions of soldiers was nowhere to be found. They scattered in panic and never looked back. But no one issued an order to pursue them as they would in any other case. It was not the time. The most important at that time was to know what happened to Robin. So everyone stood in their places looking in the direction of where he fell, hoping for the best. Only after Caesar announced that Robin's heart was still beating, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and sat down, as if their legs that could carry mountains could no longer carry their bodies. Only the life and flame forces remained standing next to the dome, supplying energy to it until all the holes were blocked, after which they sat down as well. As long as the dome is filled with flame energy and life energy, it can theoretically function and protect itself until that energy is completely exhausted. Now, for the first time since its creation, the life forces or flame forces no longer have to supply energy. They can finally catch their breath and rest their bodies, which acted as a corridor for the energy between energy pearls and the white flame dome for long hours. However, they sat next to the dome to provide it with energy if those creatures came back again. The extreme exhaustion and shock of what was happening around them at least did not make them forget this task. After being assured that Robin is still alive and taking him to his assigned tent to make the necessary examinations on him, all the army generals decide to meet to decide what will happen to start from this point. And just as Robin had expected, no two agreed. Victoria said that they should seize the opportunity of the humanoid white creature's retreat and come down from the hill, then march in any direction and destroy any enemy fortification they found in their path. But everyone said that leaving their defenses and moving the army again to an unknown place might get them into deeper trouble, as they didn't know anything about this world, and didn't know if they even had fortresses. Old Gu, however, demanded to stop everything and stay in their places until Robin woke up and he decides what to do, backing his words with the fact that it was clear from Robin's shout earlier that he knew something they did not know, and that he at least harmed the leader who controls those creatures, otherwise they would not have retreated so quickly. So it is wise to wait and listen to what he had to say before making any move. But the rest said that they don't know when Robin will wake up. Rather, they don't know if he will ever wake up again. How can everything be stopped and wait for something so unknown? And the leader of these creatures was indeed harmed by Robin. Wouldn't it be better to turn into attacking rather than staying without purpose? As for Elizabeth, she demanded that they remain in their places and continue with the war of attrition plan, provided that the opportunity of this peace be seized and the division of divine blacksmiths and rune masters complete their work in strengthening the defenses. But the rest objected that this would be equivalent to turning their precious resources into waste. Those humanoid white creatures fled in panic and didn't even look back. Would they even come back? What if it was established the defenses only to find out they wouldn't be attacked again? What is the use of a fortress if it is not attacked? Establishing the protection energy dome array and the metal wall isn't cheap. As for Caesar, he demanded that the army be divided into 5 divisions and deployed in random directions to draw a map of the area in which they are located and expand their area of control, making a small kingdom for themselves. But everyone refused, saying that they were under pressure to this degree while they were with each other. So what would happen if they dispersed and got attacked again? This meeting lasted for about 2 hours after Reuben's fall. Other than Old Gu, Elizabeth, Victoria, and Caesar, there were still about 10 other top-level sages who had a very high status in their respective empires. Each of them hold on to their views and refused to take a step back. Some of them even threatened to take his troops and start implementing his own vision. Not because they wanted to split up on purpose or wanted to rebel against the true beginning empire, or because they wanted to defy the oath they swore to Robin, but because they deeply believed with all their senses that their vision and reasons were the absolute truth, and they were certain that if they followed their plans they would bring victory to the Golden Battalion and show their worth to Robin. Everyone in this room has the ability to rule empires. Some of them have already ruled empires for hundreds or even thousands of years. If one of them thinks something is right, why should he compromise and accept someone else's opinion? If only talking could reach a conclusion that simple, planet Jura wouldn't have been divided until Robin came along. There was no glimmer of hope that the meeting would result in anything. Until suddenly Caesar changed the subject completely and demanded the appointment of a temporary second commander-in-chief until his father woke up. Everyone calmed down for the first time in the meeting. Then they sighed and nodded in agreement with Caesar's words. If the discussion continues in this direction, the army will disintegrate and each of them will take his men and do what he sees fit. This is not something that any of them wants to see, and certainly not something Robin would tolerate when he wakes up. One person has to make the decisions until Robin wakes up, and that person has to be the only one responsible for the results, whether positive or negative. Caesar was delighted when he saw this, but he soon gently furrowed his eyebrows again, ready for another long round of struggle until they chose the new leader. But to his surprise, the selection of the new leader did not last more than 10 minutes, and everyone, without exception, chose Jabba. Even Jabba, who had been sitting quietly in one corner of the tent without saying a word from the beginning, opened his eyes at the last of them in obvious shock. Everyone justified their decision that Jabba had strength equivalent to a peak Sage Realm expert and thus had the qualifications. Some said they choose him because he was His Excellency's only disciple and the one who understood him the most, and others gave different reasons. But deep inside, everyone knew the real reason, which was that Jabba had no military power behind him. Victoria, for example, has water forces, Old Gu has fire forces, and even Caesar has control over the entire Burton family's forces. So if one of them controls power, the position of that group will rise above the shoulders of others and disturb the balance. The second problem is if one of them took the lead and made bad judgment, then they can't remove him from authority anymore because he will have his men protect his newfound power. Third and last, they knew each other and no one wanted his old rival to be his superior. Only Jabba, who has nothing but himself, can take this role. And although Jabba also understood this quickly and that they chose him for his political weakness rather than his strength or status, he sighed in the end and agreed. There is nothing more important than helping the army pass through this critical point. Just like that Jabba, who was just sitting on the sidelines awaiting orders, suddenly has command of an army powerful enough to conquer worlds. Immediately after it was agreed that Jabba would temporarily take command of the army, everyone looked at him, waiting for his decisions, but their attempt to influence him could be seen in all of their eyes, each of them still wanting Jabba to choose his point of view. Jabba sighed seeing this while thinking, "What a troubled situation you left me in, Master." He knew that even after being chosen as a leader, the journey would not be without obstacles, so the idea of choosing him mainly was because he had no power backing him, so in their heads, they were already ready to disobey him if their ideas on how to command the army conflicted greatly. So after much thought, he started shooting order after order. First, he ordered them to continue working on the metal wall and the energy protection dome array, and even gave the Rune Masters and the Divine Blacksmiths full support from all available members of the Golden Battalion. Not only that, he ordered that the Rune Master need to work on the energy protection dome array so that it would cover the entire hill as Robin commanded, and not cover the area they control at this moment. Justifying this that even if they are not attacked again, it is necessary to establish a permanent headquarters on this planet, and what would be a better headquarters than the place they knew and fought over already. Also, the hill is large and can accommodate several million people that can live on top of it full-time, of course not to the extent of establishing a city, but establishing a huge camp on top of the hill that will support the entire army of planet Jura will not be a problem at all. Second, taking advantage of the time granted by Robin's sacrifice and starting to explore their surroundings by sending teams from the wind forces in different directions, making each squad has only 10 soldiers to limit losses. Third, after finishing the metal wall, the Divine Blacksmith Division shall immediately start working on a space portal. Jabba's decisions were well received and satisfied everyone's suggestions in one way or another. He did not take an attacking position and at the same time did not sit idle. Can be said that it was perfect. The only one who didn't like the decisions was Victoria, who wanted to move the entire army to make the best use of the situation and attack planet Greenland randomly. But she didn't say anything. Everyone else agreed with Jabba's decisions. If she tried to make a fuss alone now then she would be considered a rebel. Even leaving that aside, if she can't convince Caesar to do the same then she couldn't do anything even if she had the power. It can be said the Burton forces and the water forces are tied in the same boat and would do anything together. And with this, the implementation of the second commander-in-chief's decisions began immediately. The divisions of Divine Blacksmiths and Rune Masters returned to work, and a large number of members of the Golden Battalion joined them to help build the metal wall or make the metal bases of the energy protection dome array. And Peon began organizing the Wind Saints from the Burton family for several small squads to go out and explore and map the area around them. As for the rest of those who did not have work, they contented themselves with completing the construction of the camp, taking care of the injured, and relieving themselves from that harsh battle. 3 days passed after that in the blink of an eye. During these 3 days, the wind squads made a survey of the area surrounding the hill at a depth of 10 kilometers in all directions, and drew an accurate map of potential water and food sources, strategic zones, and so on. But the strange thing about the reports is that several wind teams presented in their reports that they saw some of those humanoid white creatures doing seemingly normal things like plowing lands and planting trees and irrigating them, and they even watched them talking to each other peacefully as normal human beings. This was something very strange for them after they saw with their own eyes the suicidal desire and illogical behavior of those creatures previously. But what really shocked Jabba and the rest of the generals was that every time one of the wind squads witnessed something like this, or they spotted any group of humanoid white creatures in the vicinity, those creatures would pounce on them immediately after a few seconds. It's not as if someone saw these wind squads and then told his comrades and attacked them, no, but without warning they all start running or flying towards wind squads which were perfectly hidden, and soon that team finds several other groups of the humanoid white creatures coming towards them from all directions to surround them. This was one of the reasons why the wind teams were not able to fully explore the area around the hill, although the army of humanoid white creatures seemed to have disintegrated or disappeared after Robin fell that day, after the 10-kilometer mark. The incursion is considered impossible due to the density of the numbers of these creatures. It was guaranteed that you would be spotted and attacked if passing by them after the 10-kilometer mark. But also during this period came the first good news that the Golden Battalion had heard in days. The metal wall was completed. Initially, it was estimated that the Divine Blacksmith Division would take about a week to finish, but this was considering the harsh conditions at the time. But now, with this period of peace and with the help of the entire detachment of the Divine Blacksmith's Legion, a 40-meter-high wall stood blocking the road at the neck of the hill in just 2.5 days. At the same moment they finished it, the nearly 5,000 Divine Blacksmiths went to work on the metal structure of the space portal. As for the Rune Masters Division, they had also finished the first and second parts of the Energy Dome's array. Now an area twice as large as the area that was under the protection of the White Flame Dome was now under the protection of the Energy Protection Dome's array, and they started to complete more parts of the array towards the top of the hill, following the plan to cover the sky of the entire hill. But this period of peace did not last long. On the fourth day, soldiers from the wind forces came running towards the hill from all directions in panic. Some of them listed with severe injuries, and whenever one of them reached the dome, he shouted that the enemies were coming. Quickly after, the army of white humanoids approached again. The ground forces were about double the numbers who fled, about 5 million. Their huge numbers and their spread covered the ground as far as the eye could see. However, even this majestic scene did not attract everyone's attention for more than a few seconds, as the scene in the sky was much, much worse. The flying white humanoids increased in number from 25,000 during the last time they saw them to 60,000 now. The sound of swallowing saliva echoed over the hill and became more common than the sounds of birds that were screaming in terror everywhere. Everyone began to look around in panic as they watched the approaching hostile army. They narrowly escaped death from the first battle after His Excellency intervened in a way that caused the dispersal of those humanoid white creatures. But after only 4 days they returned with double their previous numbers while His Excellency was still lying half dead. But at that moment Jabba's brows, which were deeply knotted, relaxed a bit, then began to rise them until a look of astonishment formed on his face instead of troubled fear, and then he spoke loudly, "Look at their faces." Everyone stopped looking around in panic and started to focus on the faces of the humanoid white creatures more, and soon their fearful features changed like what happened with Jabba. The eyes of these creatures are no longer empty and full of angry-looking veins as before. It now contains beautiful green pupils. And they no longer saw that desire to fight to the death either, but for the first time, they saw various emotions evident in the eyes of those humanoid white creatures. Some of them seemed excited about the battle, some of them seemed curious, and some of them seemed afraid of not coming back alive. Now, for the first time, this fearsome enemy is beginning to look like an ordinary army. But not all of them are like that. Jabba and the rest of the generals quickly managed to spot around 500 individuals scattered among the army of humanoid white creatures with those blank eyes and fierce features, and those blank-eye individuals were clearly placed in command positions. It seems that whatever Master did at that time is still in effect. When Jabba saw the scene in front of him, his features finally turned into a smile. The rest understood him too. What they are seeing now is definitely related to Robin's shout that day. They do not know what this means or what happened exactly, but it is clear that Robin did something that harmed the enemy and changed his strategy, and that is enough. No, it was more than enough. Thanks to Robin's intervention, the fearless blank-eye individuals were reduced from a few million to a few hundred of them. If they still can't take them head-on, then do they have to come here thinking about invading another planet? Soon the generals spread this news among the Golden Army to boost their morale, and then began spreading them out and making defense plans. Today he is destined not to take the same course as the first battle. First, because the number of enemies has multiplied, whether it is the land forces or the aerial forces, they were both at least double the previous army. But this is understandable, they got hammered the previous time just as they landed. It only makes sense that the leader of those creatures managed to rally more troops after 4 days. Secondly, it seems that they have returned to being more human-like in some way. The blank and fearless attitude doesn't seem to exist anymore, which is a huge factor. Thirdly, and most importantly, the defenses established by the Divine Blacksmiths and Rune Masters have not yet been tested. Sibur Hay, one of the blank-eyed white humanoid leaders, raised a sword made entirely of wood and signaled to begin the attack. Everyone atop the hill furrowed their brows and raised their weapons, ready for another grinding battle. The Burton family saints all gathered on top of the wall on Jabba's orders to kill anyone who tried to climb it. The earth-shattering attack of more than 5 million soldiers came quickly, and with tremendous momentum moved the pebbles from under the feet of the soldiers of the Golden Battalion and made fear infiltrate their hearts. But everything went calm again when they reached the wall. The first batch of white humanoids came to a complete halt when they reached the 40-meter-tall wall, just looking up with wide-open mouths. Some of them tried to throw some weapons at the wall a few times. They seemed somehow assured that their weapons would be strong enough to do something to the wall. But when the weapons fell to the ground without making a scratch in the wall, it seemed that they gave up and started exchanging puzzled looks among themselves. The blank-eyed commanders tried to force the army to rush towards the wall more than once and stand on their comrades' bodies to get through it. But the rest of the white humanoids took a step back instead. The features of their faces seemed as if they were saying, "Stand on our comrades' bodies? Are you crazy? What will happen to the brothers below? Won't they be squashed to death?" This strange and unexpected situation tied the tongues of the Burton family saints, who just looked at each other and lowered their arms, not knowing what to do. As for the situation in the sky, it was completely different. It was a real battle, just as was expected. The 60,000 saints and sages immediately launched an attack when they approached a certain distance from the hill at the orders of a few blank-eyed individuals. Although most of the attacks were not half as powerful as before, the combined attack of the 60,000 saints and sages seemed as if it was ready to harvest all the lives over the hill. The few dozen blank-eyed saints and sages among the saints and sages looked excited for the first time. Besides their ferocity, they would finally achieve some results. This attack would be enough to deal huge damage to the Golden Battalion, especially since they noticed that the annoying white flame dome that suppressed them earlier was no longer there. Vroom! All 60,000 attacks vanished before landing on the hill. It was not destroyed or dissipated. Rather, it looked like a small rock that fell into a lake. It just disappeared after making a few vibrations in space. The blank-eyed individuals were not convinced by what they saw and ordered another round of attacks, which ended in the same way. However, this time their attacks did not disappear completely, but some of them bounced back at them again and severely injured 6 saints. Not only that, but hundreds of high-speed black arrows started shooting at them from below, dropping many dead and wounded. This was the effect of the Energy Protection Dome's array. It has patterns of several major laws that enable it to absorb damage up to a certain extent, and with them the law of life that enables it to redirect the energy it absorbs as it sees fit, and most importantly, it prevents any attack coming from above from bypassing it. But it does not prevent attacks coming below. Meaning, they can't reach the hilltop land no matter how hard they try. But the sages of the Golden Army can hunt them down as they please from within the array. The new and incomprehensible situation for the saints and sages of the white humanoids forced them to quickly retreat, ignoring the blank-eyed individuals' cries that told them to continue pressing. Whether it is on land or in the sky, the battle that seemed about to destroy everything stopped a few minutes after it started. 7 days after Robin's fall, the few days after the second wave of attacks by the army of white humanoids did not witness any peace, nor did it witness any large-scale battles either. The ground hordes standing still in front of the wall, nor the rapid retreat of the saints and sages lasted long. Under their blank-eyed superiors, the white humanoid army advanced again, but with greater caution this time. It was clear that the blank-eyed white humanoid creatures tried a lot to motivate the ground hordes to get over the wall, and indeed some of them did it under pressure and began to climb, but all of them fell to the ground again without full bodies, adding to the terror within the ground hordes as they looked at the Golden Battalion members at the top of the wall in awe. Therefore, the first few rows of the ground hordes began searching in the wall for any loophole that they could exploit to pass it, or for a weak point that they could attack and make a hole using it. A blank-eyed white humanoid even began to gather those at the top of the knighthood domain and make them attack certain areas in the wall to weaken it. But to no avail. These desperate attempts became a kind of entertainment for the Burton family saints, who were busy betting on what would happen next and which spot they would attack, or whether some new fool would try to climb the wall. But the officials among them furrowed their eyebrows. The movements of white humanoids currently have become completely normal, and it can even be said that they are experienced in wars and how to bring down defenses. They weren't bad at this. The wall designed by His Excellency Reuben was just a very harsh test for them. The original wall and designed to receive an emperor-level attack with ease, even if this one is the weaker version. it is still not something a top-level sage can take down easily, much less a few knights. How could such an experienced army be afraid? It was very clear from their eyes that they were remembering the events of the previous battle that lasted for hours. The battle in which a handful of the Golden Battalion personnel died after taking down millions of them. From fearless idiots to terrified veterans. The change is too fast and too big. The second strange thing is that when one of the saints targeted one of the blank-eyed white humanoids below and thoughtfully killed him, another random individual from among the white human creatures turned fierce. His pupils disappeared, and he took a leading spot in the front rows as if nothing had happened. This process was repeated and thousands of blank-eyed humanoids were hunted, but they always reappeared. It was found that there are always 327 blank-eyed humanoids lurking among the ground hordes. No matter how many of them were killed, they will always reappear. The strangest thing is that the rest of the white humanoid creatures would obey the new blank-eyed humanoid as if nothing happened. A minute ago your comrade is next to you just trying to survive, and a second later, he's your boss who will tell you to advance and kill yourself in battle. This scene amused the Burton Saints a lot actually, and started placing bets on where would the next blank-eyed humanoid appear before they kill him again. But of course, the entertainment did not stop them from reporting all these important events and observations immediately to the generals and to the second commander-in-chief, Jabba. As for the saints and sages of the white human creatures, they were even more careful. Some of them would advance once in a while to hurl some precision attacks at separate areas of the energy protection dome's array to test it out, and then flee back quickly before the dome sent back the attacks or before the sages of the wind force fired black arrows at them. The powerful new defenses that protected the hill, along with the awe of white humanoid creatures and the restoration of their natural fear of death as living creatures, made life easier for Jabba and the Golden Battalion greatly. Even with more than double their previous number, the threat was halved. The battle this time was not a quarter of the intensity of the first, although it continued for several days. Rather, it can be said that this was not a battle in the first place. Although the siege around the hill was so tight that even an ant could not get out or enter the hill, life on top of the hill was actually very relaxed. With so much food in their space rings and so many seeds that life forces could turn into fruit trees, no one feared starving to death. The battle was taking place and the siege was intensifying. But on top of the hill, the youths were busy treating the 6,000 sages, preparing food, and playing betting games. Of course, not everyone was so lucky. Elizabeth and the plant forces were still suffering badly because there is no array to protect them from underground attacks. It can be said that the plant forces are the only ones at war right now. But even the pressure on them was not that severe. After all, no saint or sage of the enemies dared to get too close to the dome to enter the appropriate range of attack. 10 days after Robin's fall, half of the ground hordes of the humanoid white creatures retreated and hurried in a northwest direction. When Jabba heard the report, he was about to order an investigation of the situation. But then an even stranger report came to him. On that same day, the 60,000 saints and sages of the humanoid white creatures appeared together and stood at a safe distance from the hill, then sent 10 saints near the energy protection dome array. Those 10 saints started shouting and making a few gestures with their hands. Sign language could be said to be universal. Everyone up the hill quickly understood that these 10 people were asking for a challenge. This is obviously a trap. We can't send our men out of the energy protection dome array. Old Goose spoke with knotted eyebrows. Most likely, they just want to kill a few saints from our side to boost their confidence. Kill a few saints from our side to boost their confidence? I don't think so. They already killed more than 1,000 from our side. But I agree with Old Goo, we should ignore them. Victoria nodded and said coldly. Maybe they want to keep up busy to forget about their group troops' withdrawal? Maybe they don't want us to attack them as they retreat. Elizabeth added. Hearing this, Jabba remained silent for a long time as he looked up, and then finally said, gesturing at Caesar, "Let us follow along with them for now." Caesar nodded and immediately selected 10 of the Burton family's saints and sent them to accept the challenge. But he had no time to stand up and watch what was going on. At this moment, someone came to tell him that His Excellency Robin had woken up. Meanwhile, after Caesar returned from Robin's tent and was assured that he had activated the soul replenishing technique, His eyebrows furrowed as he watched the battle taking place between the 20 saints. The white human saints were not blank-eyed. They showed the excitement of a good fight and fear when facing a strong attack. They communicated with each other a lot by shouting in their language. It was apparent that the fact that they were not blank-eyed did not weaken them at all. On the contrary, they showed great creativity in their attacks and high-level cooperation between them. Even after the fight began for about a quarter of an hour, there was no clear winner. For Jabba and the rest of the high-level generals in the Golden Battalion, the most interesting factor to look at in battle were the wooden weapons they carry. The 10 saints of the Burton family gave up the full-body golden armor of their own free will before exiting the dome to have a fair fight, but they also took their golden divine weapons with them, so it can be said that their attack power is still close to its peak. However, their golden divine weapons weren't able to take the initiative against those wooden weapons, and they even seemed to be somewhat equivalent. This not only surprised the members of the Golden Battalion, it even surprised the spectating human white creatures. The long battle that took place between Alexander and the 6,000 sages against more than 20,000 saints and sages of the humanoid white creatures was somewhat dependent on survival. There was no time to compare weapons, techniques, etc., and even one of them sensed something abnormal. There was no way to make sure of it. Only now the suspicions of both sides were confirmed. It was clear on their features that each side wondered how the other side could possess weapons equal in strength with their own. The second thing that everyone began to pay attention to was how pure and powerful the other side's law techniques were. So far, several major laws had emerged from both sides. But the Burton Saints side had always been the winner in the test of strength and purity of laws, except for one major law, the plant law. It is the only law that has reached the perfect stage and is almost identical to the perfect major plant law that Robin handed over to Elizabeth that day. In second place were the minor laws related to Earth Path and Wind Path. Its purity level was extremely high, at least it was higher than that of the 4 empires before the appearance of Robin. Other than that, the rest of the laws are full of serious impurities, especially the laws related to the Fire Path and Thunder Path. They all looked like the laws the Baron families of the Black Sun Kingdom were using back then. No, even worse. The fact that these laws have reached a sufficient level that makes the user a saint or a sage is in itself a great achievement. And even important news that must be conveyed to His Excellency Robin that such trash techniques can make someone a sage. It can't be that this is just an ordinary challenge, really, huh? Caesar asked after a few minutes, unable to detect anything abnormal. How is it possible that those creatures who were seeking to exterminate them suddenly have enough brains to start challenges and open ways of communication? This doesn't seem logical at all. Is it possible that their leader gave up and decided to find out more about the aliens that appeared on his land? At this moment Jabba smiled and replied, "Your vision is too short." "Huh." Caesar looked towards me, opening his mouth. "Sometimes not everything will meet the eyes. You have to look for them on your own. Ignore the battle, buddy. Spread your spirit sense as far as possible and focus on what is happening in the background," Jabba advised. Caesar looked back at him and did as Jabba says, and quickly his eyebrows sank down again. There are many saints and sages of the humanoid white creatures slowly withdrawing and hiding behind the backs of their fellows that covered the sky with their large numbers, then slowly descending down to the forest under the cliff, and then running in the other direction quickly under the cover of the thick trees. They were all running towards the northwest. "What is happening exactly?" Caesar asked with apparent anger. There was something behind their backs, and it can't be good. It seems to be a plan to withdraw a large part of their main forces without our noticing. The withdrawal of the ground forces can be ignored since they are almost useless after we built the wall. We can just brush it off and say that they simply returned to their day-to-day work to reduce the burden of feeding and sheltering such a massive army. But withdrawing part of the main forces, which are the saints and sages, is something else entirely. It will definitely arouse our suspicions and tempt us to make a move against them if we saw them retreating, so they are trying to divert our attention to other things while secretly withdrawing. During the past quarter of an hour, a few dozen saints have left already. As for the reason, I don't know. Jabba shrugged and replied in a low, calm voice. Then he continued, "Actually, this plan isn't bad at all. They approach us in full force, showing off their true numbers, then slowly withdraw as we focus on the mini-battle. If it weren't for the powerful souls that were given to us by Master's soul-strengthening technique, we wouldn't be able to detect what was going on in the background, and wouldn't we be able to observe the detailed numbers of their forces? We would just go with the flow and watch their techniques and weapons as we try to further communicate with them. Unfortunately for them, we have Master on our side and they don't. Caesar returned to look at Jabba, not knowing what to say. He spoke as if discovering them through the spiritual sense was something self-evident, but he had watched the situation just like Jabba for a few minutes and it did not occur to him to spare his senses that much focus on the people in the background. Who would do this? Probably of all those present, only Jabba thought about this point. This is not the first time that Jabba has shocked him with one of the decisions or procedures in which he sees his adoptive father's shadow. What is the difference between me and Jabba? Experience, intelligence, thinking outside the box. If my adoptive father had not found me as an infant and had to choose between me and Jabba to be his first disciple of choice, who would he have chosen? Caesar sighed resignedly at the thought of this, and asked again in a low voice, "Such a large withdrawal plan means that they are up to something, and most likely a very large number of them will slowly take off. Then what to do now, Second Commander?" "Nothing. For now at least." Jabba gave a big smile and said. The mini-battle was extremely fierce, but that did not last for long. After another 10 minutes, the first saint to fall in the battle was a humanoid creature. Then another, and then another. The wide experience of the Burton family soldiers, which they gained from the 10-year war against the Flame Empire, made them get used to the techniques of their opponents much faster and make the suitable arrangements. And while the golden divine weapons and wooden weapons seemed very close in durability and power, the attacking and defensive measures in the golden divine weapons made the difference. And then the great gap between the quality of the heavenly law techniques between them and the humanoid white creatures drove the final nail in their coffin. It can even be said that the fight, which stayed in balance for about half an hour, was due to the fear of the unknown, as each side played it carefully, fearing what the other side had in its arsenal. The other reason is that the saints of humanoid white creatures focused on defense and avoidance most of the time. But after the killing of 7 saints of them, their defense and avoidance plan no longer worked, and the remaining 3 saints withdrew quickly, ignoring the shouts of blank-eyed superiors, which clearly indicated that they were not satisfied with their return. Some blank-eyed individuals even chased those 3 and beat them until they were on the brink of death. The region fell silent again. It was clear from the charged atmosphere and the expressions on the faces of the saints and sages of the humanoid creatures that they did not plan for the fight to end in their loss, or at least with such a humiliating result and great speed. This was evident in the tactics of the 10 saints who focused on defense and avoidance most of the time. When Jabba saw this, he smiled and gestured for the other 10 Burton saints to take off their armor and step outside the energy protection dome array. It was he who gave the challenge this time, and as if cold water was poured on them, Jabba could feel clearly that all the humanoid creatures relaxed quite a bit, especially the blank-eyed individuals. Their features took a good curve for the first time. All of them had foolish smiles on their faces, as if they were achieving a great victory. Caesar noticed this and asked in astonishment, "Ahem, Second Commander, do mind if what the hell are you doing exactly?" He did not know why those humanoid creatures were running away in the background and why, but it was logical that the enemy have to be stopped if he was planning to do something. But Jabba's arrangement now seemed as if he was satisfying the blank-eyed plan and helping them. Jabba smiled as he watched the Burton soldiers prepare to start the second fight, then said, "We are already besieged by millions of enemies. What worse could happen to us if those saints and sages retreated? Even if they just stand up and retreat now, how and why might we stop them? Do you want us to step out and fight them to stop them from leaving? What is the use of the energy protection dome array then? Wouldn't that be exactly what they want? With the advantages of greater numbers and the ability to fly in their favor, we will not have a chance in a direct fight. The most we can do would be to force them to retreat, but they are already retreating now without a fight. Honestly, I still don't know why are they retreating, but they are reducing the number of troops surrounding us and giving us a better chance of survival. Why would we stop them? We should help them. There is something you must always remember, little brother. If you see the enemy make a mistake, it is foolish to stop him." Caesar raised his eyebrows when he heard this, then nodded several times and returned to watch the second fight, which very soon became the third fight, then the fourth, then the 14th, After the 21st fight, verbal tension took place between the sages of humanoid creatures. It was clear from their signs towards the corpses and the wounded that the verbal fight was due to the successive losses that they had to bear. This verbal fight quickly developed into a huge conflict, which quickly ended as over 20,000 saints and sages broke away from the main army in anger, and then just dispersed, each person going in a different direction. If Jabba and the rest of the generals of the Golden Army had not been aware of what was happening in the background, they might have believed what had just happened, but they knew with certainty that what had just happened was a game to increase the speed of the army's retreat. It seemed that their leader thought that retreating secretly in the background is no longer worth the huge cost his army had to bear. But Jabba ignored this as well and accepted the request for the match again from one of the empty-eyed individuals who seemed angry. It is clear that he wanted to compensate for the successive losses they had suffered and restore the dignity of their race. Or this is what he was trying to show at least. And Jabba agreed. The fights continued again without problems, and the retreating process actually still continued in the background all the way until the 43 fight. After that fight, the total number of saints and sages of the white humanoid creatures besieging the hill settled at 20,000. After reaching that specific number, the frequency of requesting and approving fights decreased, and the saints and sages of the white humanoid creatures tried to hide in the woods at the bottom of the steep cliff so that their real numbers would not be spotted by their enemy eyes. Gradually they returned to laying the siege as if nothing had happened. When Jabba saw this, he smiled and returned to camp, then gave an order to all the members of the Golden Battalion to sleep well for the rest of the night and meet tomorrow morning again in the same place. The next day, Jabba came out of his tent, yawning and groaning as if he had had the best night's sleep in months, then smilingly strode up the hill with his big hands behind his back, nodding continually all the way in greeting. The Golden Battalion had rested and had already assembled at the top of the hill as they were ordered, all holding their helmets with one hand and looking at the second commander, Jabba, making his way between them. Finally, when he reached the most distant point under the protection of the Energy Protection Dome's array, he took a few more steps and continued forward until his fingertips were already out of the steep cliff, then finally turned around to face his army of nearly 50,000 saints and sages, spreading his arms at the sides and smilingly shouted, "It must have been hard for you guys to stay in one place all these days. Today I decided to take you all for a walk towards the northwest. Watch out. A new attack wave is coming from above. Boom, boom, boom. Ugh. A group of 200 white humanoids has split off from the main block and is heading to the left. Prepare to engage. Yes. Boom. Damn it, Jabba. I pray you have a good explanation for this decision of yours. You all be rolled accountable in front of His Excellency when he wakes up," Old Goo shouted in a fit of anger. 3 hours ago Jabba announced that he would take the army and head in a northwest direction, and before anyone could figure out the reason behind his sudden decision, or anyone else could object, Jabba threw himself from the top of the cliff and engaged directly the enemy saints and sages camped below the steep cliff. The rest of the gathered army could not stand and watch their second commander being surrounded and killed, so they jumped after him, and a great battle began down the cliff. The enemy saints and sages camped at the bottom of the cliff were surprised by the sweeping attack descending on them from above. This was the first time that the Golden Battalion moved into the attack instead of crouching down and defending desperately. It was a scene similar to the jumping of white humanoids on the Golden Battalion when they first arrived on planet Greenland. But the difference this time was that the jumpers were not ready to commit suicide, but rather descended to kill. This is in addition to the fact that for the first time since the invasion of planet Greenland began, the numerical balance was in favor of the Golden Battalion. With a number approaching 40,000 saints and sages, compared to only 20,000 or so on the other side, in addition to the advantages of the complete divine body armors and better law techniques, the battle below the cliff quickly turned into a one-sided massacre. The saints and sages of the white humanoids wasted more than a whole day implementing a plan for a silent retreat, and more than 400 of them were killed during the individual battles to implement that plan. But with that everything went in vain. It turned out that the enemy understood what was going on and took advantage of their numerical advantage to launch an all-out attack. What kind of luck was this? The 20,000 white humanoid saints and sages could do nothing but fly away from that massacre. They didn't get away though, but all flew into the air and rained down the Golden Battalion with attacks from above. taking advantage of the fact that the Golden Battalion would not dare to fly. And indeed none of them flew behind them, but that was not their intention from the beginning anyway. After fighting for about half an hour and forcing all the saints and sages of the white humanoids to fly back, Jabba advanced with all his speed towards a northwest direction, with the rest of the Golden Battalion behind him. Not because they want to, but because the cliff they jumped over is so high and steep, it is almost a 90-degree angle, and as they can no longer fly up to their place on the hill, nor can they climb the cliff with their hands and feet because they would be easy prey for the attacks of the flying enemies. Old Goo and a few other people at the top of the sage level decided that they would accompany Jabba for a few kilometers just to make sure he was safe on his mission, whatever it was, and then they would come back up the hill from the normal route as they had climbed it the first time, cutting through the 2.5 million white humanoids ground army on their way. But at least it's less dangerous than following Jabba and going northwest where the saints and sages of the white humanoids gather. Who knows what they will find there? What if they found hundreds of thousands of those sages and saints gathering to kill them? What if they found the one who sent these thunderbolts? Or maybe everything is a trap and they are moving to their deaths. Every alarm in their heads told them that they absolutely should not go in this direction. But they quickly changed their minds and followed Jabba further and further, until 2.5 hours had passed and they were still with him running through the trees in a northwest direction. The reason? The madness of white humanoid creatures. They had thought that those creatures would breathe a sigh of relief after they moved away for a few kilometers and go bombard the half-empty headquarters above the cliff. But the truth was that the 20,000 white humanoid saints and sages followed them all the way, raining down attacks on them with panic evident on their faces. If you see something that hurts your enemy, do it. This is one of the laws of war, and as long as the enemy does not want them to go in this direction, then they must go. This was an understanding that all the members of the Golden Battalion reached as they moved forward. Not one of them asked why we didn't turn back yet. They fell silent and just continued forward behind Jabba. But the air attack was very strong. Although their numbers are much less and their strength is weaker, they have the advantage of flight. Every now and then Jabba and his men have to stop to send some attacks and break up the ranks of the enemies, but they quickly regroup and complete their aerial attacks again. After 2.5 hours of continuous running and clashing with the enemy who bombarded them non-stop from above, their forces were almost completely exhausted. The only one who was still enjoying what was going on and attacking the flying white humanoid creatures with full force and rushing forward with fervor was none other than Victoria. What was happening now was exactly like her suggestion after Robin went unconscious. As for the rest, although they were still moving forward without complaint, some fear began to unavoidably creep into their hearts. They now see that moving in this direction angers the white humanoids, so they do it. That's understandable. But what if they don't reach their goal before their energy is completely exhausted? What if they found themselves in the middle of nowhere with no power to fight back or shelter to protect them? This is why, although Old Goo began to understand the reason for Jabba's advance in this direction, and tacitly agreed with him until this moment, he did not hold himself from placing all responsibility on him again. Of course, I will take responsibility in front of my master. Don't worry, just keep moving forward. I have a feeling that we will strike it big this time. Jabba smiled and replied while still lunging forward. Another hour passed. The panic of the saints and sages of the white humanoids became too apparent, especially the blank-eyed people who began to carry out suicide attacks, descending from above and blowing themselves up in the midst of the Golden Battalion formation, causing heavy injuries. These ruthless tactics left several deaths among the Burton family's saints, but aside from taking a second to collect their corpses, no one stopped. I see the light. We are about to get out of the woods. Get ready to stop and execute the defense formation number 3 right after that, Jabba shouted loudly. He entered one of the forests on purpose a while ago to reduce the attacks from above as much as possible, and this indeed worked. But after leaving it, the suicide and coordination attacks will return even fiercer, while most of the Golden Battalion members are already exhausted. So the best way would be to take a defensive formation for a short time and then continue the march after that. Here we go. Set up the defensive formation after 3, 2, and 1, huh? Jabba raised his hands and almost gave the order to execute the formation. But immediately after coming out of the thick woods, he saw something strange that made him lose his voice. Not too far away, he saw a huge battle. A battle between millions of white human creatures against
humans. Boom.
Jabba seemed to have no control over his lower jaw, which dropped after seeing the sight in front of him. And he was not alone. Old Gu, Victoria, and the rest of the top-level sages in the front rows also stood with open mouths staring at the bizarre sight in front of them. The milky white humanoids who have drained them out since they set foot on this planet are now embroiled in a colossal battle, and one that seems to have been going on for several hours as well. Their enemies are not monsters or human-like beings like them, but rather
Humans.
They do not have a specific uniform, but they wear clothes woven from wool threads and traditional metal armor, and whether facial features, bodies, or auras, almost everything about them is almost identical to the people of planet Jura. The battle includes an army of 3 million foot soldiers and about 40,000 saints and sages on the white humanoid side, compared to 2 million foot soldiers and around 50,000 saints and sages on the human side. The human army was following a tactic similar to what Robin decided after he saw the thunderbolts, as not all of their sages and saints were flying, but almost rather half of them, meaning that there are currently 40,000 white humanoids against 25,000 humans in an air battle, while the rest of the sages and saints of the humans are on the ground helping the ground forces and sometimes support their air forces with upward attacks. Another thing worth noting is the other creatures on the battlefield. For example, the aerial battle was not exclusive to the sages and saints on every side, but there are swarms of millions of insects that look like bees attacking the white humanoid side. Those insects were not very strong individually, but with the size of an adult man's fist, coupled with their huge numbers and their concentration in attacking only the saints of the white humanoids, made them a constant and serious threat. Although each attack of a saint of the white human being could bring down hundreds or even thousands of them, their presence and constant disturbance tipped the scales in the aerial battle towards the humans by a fine margin. There were also other ground beasts resembling rhinoceros used by humans as mounts, and other giant beasts loaded with equipment and supplies and carrying nests for the insects, and even other beasts the size of dogs, but they are very fast and make a difference on the battlefield, and many more. Although the numerical balance was clearly tilted towards the white humanoids, the battle was almost even. And most important of all this is that the numbers of the blank-eyed individuals were very few. If all those white humanoids were all empty-eyed and attacked them the same way they attacked the Golden Battalion, then all these tactics the humans were employing would not have been of any use, and that battle would have ended immediately after it began with the destruction of the two armies. But the white humanoids now are fighting and retreating like any normal army. This is what brings the battle to the balance it is in now. A balance that seems somewhat frightening. If the battle continues at the same pace, it may take days to end, and it may even end with the loss of one army. But the other army will have to withdraw because of the damage it received. It was easy to predict what would have happened if more than half of the army of white humanoids had not been busy surrounding the Golden Battalion all along. "What is going on here?" one of the Wind Force sages muttered, his eyes wide open. This did not look like a battle for land or authority. The huge scale and thick killing intent spoke volumes about how important this battle is for both sides. They seemed like treating it as a species annihilation war of some sort. Jabba did not know how to respond. Rather, he did not expect this in his wildest dreams. Ever since he knew the plan of the sages and saints of the white humanoids to retreat, and he immediately decided to follow them, he thought, what is that important that enforce for the leader of those creatures to withdraw more than half his army when they are fighting to the death against alien invaders? Whether there is a problem facing the leader of the white humanoids, then he has to make use of it, or that person is concocting a plan, then he has to go see it and destroy it before it starts. Whether this or that, he had to follow them. However, he deliberately waited all night and gave them enough time to leave a great distance between them. Why? Because the saints and sages who had not left would definitely chase after them when they came down the hill, and he did not want the saints and sages who had withdrawn earlier to come back when they heard that they were being chased. If this happened, then it would have put them in an awkward situation where they would attack from the front and the back. Not even a new white flame dome would protect them from the combined attacks of 60,000 saints and sages then. Although he had taken precautions before issuing the order to pursue, he was fully prepared for something unexpected to happen that might destroy the entire Golden Battalion. Nevertheless, he took the risk and ordered action, but not in his wildest dreams did he expect to see what he was seeing now. Boom, boom, boom. since Jabba came out and the front ranks of the forest hadn't even had 2 seconds yet. But in those short 2 seconds they received thousands of attacks from above. The white humanoids chasing after them seemed furious and feeling like a failure because they couldn't stop Jabba and the rest along the way. So they ignored their exhaustion and increased the pace of the attack. Had it not been for the fact that the back ranks of the Golden Battalion had not yet left the forest completely and were still defending desperately and sending counterattacks, those attacks would have caused enormous damage. Those fierce attacks awakened Jabba and the rest of the generals from their resistance, and they were about to enter that defensive formation to deal with the attacks coming from above. But at that moment a voice came from the direction of the battlefield.
Saem Delach.
Jabba sensed an excited tone in that shout and even some joy. He couldn't suppress his curiosity and looked towards the battlefield again, trying to find the source of the sound. It was one of the human sages, looking in turn at Jabba and the rest with eyes full of shock and delight, and most importantly, it seemed from his look as if he understood something.
Saem Delach. Saem Delach.
After that human sage's shout, the rest of the human saints and sages began to look in the direction of the Golden Battalion with the same gaze and repeated the same shout. Then the human ground forces followed suit. Quickly, the humans began a strong wave of attacks with their high morals, pushing back the white humanoids and gaining the upper hand. So that's how it is. That's how it is. Jabba muttered with his eyes wide open. Those humans look a lot like you guys of planet Jura. If you give them the golden armor, there won't be any difference between you. That's why those white humanoids didn't hesitate to attack us when they first saw us, because they thought you were their local enemies. This. Old Gu, Victoria, and the rest exchanged glances upon hearing Jabba's words. This was very possible. It could even be said that there was no other explanation. When an army from another planet comes to you, the first thing you will try to do is try to communicate to know who they are and what they want, and whether there is any hope of resolving the matter peacefully. What fool would try to attack the newcomers directly? Even if he managed to kill them somehow, wouldn't that have earned him eternal enmity with the other planet without even knowing why? This was one of the most inconsequential things that occupied the minds of all the members of the Golden Battalion. But Jabba's words now finally put their minds at ease. No wonder they did not try to make peace. And no wonder they attacked directly without words. That was because there was no need to speak. When you see an army battalion of your sworn enemies inside your land, do you think they have come in peace? If butting it to this perspective, their reaction was very natural. Bad luck. Of all the planets in existence, and of all the places where we can land safely, we landed in a place where the locals thought we were their old enemies. What kind of luck is this? One of the sages of the Burton family spoke while shaking his head with a half-smile. Fate was playing with them. Who knows if they are locals or not? Old Gu shook his head. I can't help but think that one of the two races we see now is an alien race. Like us, and most likely they are those humanoids. This. Boom boom boom. Is this a problem though? Jabba suddenly spoke with an excited facial expression, ignoring the successive attacks that were still raining down on them. Old Gu and the rest furrowed their brows when they heard Jabba's words, but they just looked at him, waiting for him to finish. Those white humanoids, and most importantly, their leader, they most certainly think we are their historical enemies, meaning we are Greenlandic humans in their eyes. Now look over there. What do you see? Jabba pointed towards the huge human army in front of them. Look at their features. It's clear that they are excited to see us. Not one of them is looking at us in surprise or shock, but it looks like we are their lost brothers from years ago. They don't look stupid to me. But for some reason, they also don't seem to think that we are strangers from this planet. You mean? Caesar muttered in astonishment. Jabba gave a big smile and spoke. The misunderstanding that occurred made everyone think that we are locals. No one treats us as invaders from another planet. You all know what this means to us? Everyone opened their eyes to her last. How could they not know? They came with a small army to protect Robin as he would be trying to establish diplomatic and commercial relations with the leaders of this planet. According to Robin's declaration, all he wants is to benefit from the planet's accumulated experiences and unique resources in strengthening his army. He did not come to kill blindly. But that is easier said than done. Who would feel secure when dealing with an alien army? At least there will be a few battles before the locals are convinced they have to bow their heads. and even then the two parties will never feel at ease. As for directly invading the world and subjugating it under the true beginning empire, this is even more difficult. It will be a devastating war that will last for years and perhaps decades and exhaust the resources of both sides. This is not something that Robin, who is striving to strengthen his own army before the invasion of Nahari, would want. That is why everyone was frustrated when they thought that their identity had been revealed before Robin achieved a foothold on planet Greenland, because that meant they would have to take the path of direct warfare to subdue the planet. But if everyone thinks of them as locals, then, when Old Gu thought of the huge possibilities that could be exploited with their new status, he looked towards Jabba respectfully, then sighed and asked, "Hey, what is next, Second Commander?" But Jabba didn't respond directly. He just kept watching the battle in front of him for a few moments before calmly replying. Starting a large-scale battle like this right after our appearance is definitely not a coincidence, and I'm certain that the humanoids didn't issue. Even if they are brain-dead, they wouldn't start a war while they already have one inside their lands. It seems the humans somehow knew that there was a battle going on within the territory of their enemies, and that is why they decided to seize the opportunity and penetrated into their lands, and now appeared in front of them coming from within the humanoids' territory, while those white humanoids raining attacks on us on top of that, all that gave them the answer they were looking for. They now know that we are the ones who gave them this opportunity. They know that we are the enemies of their enemies. The enemies of their enemies, Victoria muttered in a low voice. When Jabba heard it, he giggled loudly. Yes, the enemy of the enemy is a friend. How can we let our friends face the enemy alone? Then, with a wave of his hand, a huge golden war hammer appeared. He pointed towards the enormous battlefield in front of him and said one word, "Attack!" Inside the Imperial tent on the steep hill. "Have you heard the latest news?" One of the girls inside the tent broke the silence and spoke, although her gentle features barely gave the impression that she was in her early 20s. The symbol on her golden shield clearly said that she was a saint of the Life Legion. "You talk about Jabba's actions? Yeah, who hasn't heard about it yet? He's too reckless." Another Life Legion saint replied as he poured himself a pink liquid into a cup. But another mature-looking woman next to him moved her hand and gently slapped the back of that male saint's head. "You are a soldier. Don't talk about the second commander like that in his absence." "Arg, Aunt Lindsay, why did you do this? It's not as if someone is going to hear us here." That saint scratched the back of his head and spoke annoyed. "Secondly, how do you see his actions? He took most of the army and left without giving reasons. They have been away for 3 days now, who knows what happened to them. Why didn't he wait and defend the hill until His Excellency woke up and makes his own decisions? It is him we are following, not that 3 meters tall alien. He is only a disciple of His Excellency, but he acted as if he was our true leader. And I also support Brother Peterson in this. The second commander took 40,000 soldiers from the Golden Battalion and left in haste. There was no one left to defend His Excellency if something happened. Currently, there are only the 5,000 wounded sages on the hill, and only less than 4,000 soldiers that can be relied upon. But even these are mostly life forces and plant forces. And of course the bodies of the 1,500 deceased who have been killed in battle since we arrived on the planet. How can we defend His Excellency with this number of forces if a new raid comes? The girl with delicate features spoke in a low voice. The woman called Lindsay was silent for a moment and looked at the ground, not knowing how to respond. It is true that the situation on top of the hill has remained secure since Jabba and the 40,000 Golden Battalion members left. That's because all the hostile white humanoids ground forces around the hill withdrew and headed northwest after them. Currently, the hill has no enemies surrounding it. This, however, does not guarantee that other troops may not come to attack them again at any moment. The energy protection dome array and the metallic wall presence are the only factors that assured them a little. But can those 2 defensive lines protect everyone on the hill forever? No. Especially the metallic wall, which is a shadow of the original design. If the enemy sages concentrate their attacks on it, they will surely destroy it. The 5,000 sages who had been affected by the lightning strike had been extensively treated under the supervision of the life law from Lady Zara personally, except that they were still not in the best condition. And even though there were approximately 10,000 other individuals on top of the hill, namely the Divine Blacksmith's Division and the Rune Master's Division, their combat capabilities are very limited. Secondly, even regardless of this and that, what is happening with those 40,000 soldiers? All the saints and sages of the white humanoids immediately followed them, and all the ground forces quickly followed as well. Did they have to battle all these things head-on? What if they were trapped there without the energy protection dome array and the metallic wall to take cover behind? The 40,000 soldiers can die. We ourselves can die. We can easily be replaced. And new Burton family members will step forward and continue to spread the family glory with His Excellency for eternity. But the problem is who will protect His Excellency if we die here. His Excellency Robin Burton must not die here no matter what. But Lindsay finally replied in a low voice, "Don't worry about these things. His Highness Caesar Burton also went out with the immediate commander. If he feels there is a threat to His Excellency Robin's life, he will certainly lead the rest of our kin back. Every Burton family member knows his priorities. Our family members not coming back until now means that they see that it's better for them to stay there." The other girl and young man looked at each other and then towards the ground and did not respond. Indeed, Caesar Burton, the adopted son of their family icon, is the only person they can trust at the moment, but they cannot even contact him to find out what is going on. Although all the forces of the Golden Battalion have sound rings, they cannot communicate with the rest of their relatives from the Burton family to find out what is going on. It was forbidden to use sound rings randomly so that the other side does not get distracted during a battle, for example, and to stop the secret information from spreading among the soldiers, as even if they were all elites and mostly family members, some secrets must stay secrets in a war zone. So they were informed that the use of these rings is limited to sending an extremely urgent report to the generals or receiving orders from their superiors. Although they cannot communicate with their relatives, they are not completely oblivious though. General Elizabeth Trent didn't jump after Jabba that day and stayed behind willingly to lead the defense of the hill, and she said more than once that she is in constant contact with the rest of the generals who left and that the situation is good and that they do not have to worry. But the problem is that she did not say anything else, for example, why this number of members of the Golden Battalion left, or what is happening abroad, or when they will return. Everything that happens abroad remains something shrouded in mystery. No need to worry. They are all capable people. As long as the situation is stable here, they are certainly in a good position wherever they are. Otherwise, we would have been hammered already. A weak voice suddenly broke the silence. You are right, if they brought our guys out there then they would definitely try to eliminate us by now, but that doesn't mean they will stay okay, right? We saw the white humanoid creature's forces and know what are they capable of. They are not something that 40,000 of our troops can handle alone. And Lindsay gently nodded and started muttering as she looked at the floor, then raised her head with raised eyebrows and looked around. Wait, who said that? The girl and the young man also looked puzzled and shook their heads. They also didn't know who spoke just now. None of you look towards me. Have you all lost hope that I will wake up one day or what? The sound came out again, accompanied by movement this time. Robin, who was lying on his bed for almost 2 weeks, had sat up. Your Excellency.